Chapter 584. I still have two things that I don't understand. I hope Senior can help me. Ling Zhao's expression was indifferent, without the slightest hint of panic. But in the eyes of the female immortal, this calmness was more like a surrender to fate. Her cultivation had already surpassed that of this realm. Even if her physical body was destroyed, her spirit was not something an emperor god could fight against. Moreover, the sky demon reincarnated in front of her had not even reached the first divine king realm. So, how could he fight against her? I know. The female immortal nodded. Do you want to ask me how I knew you would come at this time? No. I would like to know, how did you know that I would definitely appear in this world? Ling Xiao shook his head. It seemed that Han Qing Xiu was just an insignificant chess piece. Whether she could find him or not was completely based on luck. And the responsibility of the people of Cold Moon Immortal Palace was to spread the news that the immortal world contained the secret of immortal ascension and sealed the great demon. But the precondition for all this was that the female immortal knew he would appear in this world. For ordinary cultivators, the words great demon were taboo. Even if the demon bone contained unparalleled mysteries, no one would easily think about it. In other words, perhaps only the reincarnated sky demon would be interested in the demon bone. Otherwise, even with the female immortal strength, she could not completely refine the demon bone, let alone others. But how could she be so sure that he would appear in this world? After all, according to Xiong Huan and Liang Yi, this world was vast and endless, and the Shangzhou was just one of thousands of worlds. How did the female immortal know that he would be reincarnated and appear here? Suddenly, Ling Xiao thought of a possibility. Liang Yi, there is a demon general in the Heavenly Demon Palace. His title is Evil Dragon, but most people call him the Demon General of Samsara. Back then, when the immortal race's army destroyed the old subordinates of the Heavenly Demon Palace, it just so happened that the Yi clan was ordered to kill him. The female immortal explained calmly and patiently. Perhaps it was the loneliness of 1,000 years that filled her heart. It was also possible that she was still hesitating. In short, she didn't seem to be in a hurry to attack Ling Xiao. In other words, she was confident that Ling Xiao would not be able to escape from her grasp. As expected, Ling Xiao nodded and heaved a sigh of relief. From the looks of it, this female immortal must have set up a trap when Liang Yi was reincarnated. That was why she was able to track his aura and not Liang Yi's betrayal. With a woman's temperament, this was nothing to be shocked about. 1,000 years of planning, just for a single day. Such extravagance and boldness truly caused one to feel somewhat terrified. However, she was, at most, an unremarkable character in the immortal clan. Yet, she still had such wisdom. One could only imagine how terrifying the ancient gods who had truly killed the sky demon and now controlled the 9 heavens were. This path was truly fraught with danger. Only a corner of heaven and earth was revealed, but it was a 1,000-year-old conspiracy. When Liang Yi destroyed his own cultivation and entered the cycle of reincarnation, I left a spirit mark on his body. Although this mark eventually dissipated, the location was in the Shangzhou wasteland. The female immortal's eyes flashed with a smile. My Foliaceae and Liang Yi's evil dragon guards have fought for hundreds of years. I have a good understanding of him. Given his temperament, when the sky demon died, he would have sacrificed his last drop of blood to avenge it. However, he entered the cycle of reincarnation, so I guess that he is waiting for the sky demon to return. 900 years ago, when I arrived here, I did not find the evil dragon general. Instead, I met Xiong Huan, who was hiding here, and this sky demon skull. So, this is probably fate and also an opportunity for my Foliaceae. 17 years ago, this demon bone suddenly let out a shocking buzzing sound, and various strange phenomena appeared in the immortal world. So, I guess that you had returned. Of course, I admit that I took a gamble, but now it seems that I made the right bet. At this moment, the female immortal's face was clearly filled with lingering fear. One could only imagine how terrifying the demon bone's strange phenomenon was. According to Ling Zhao's speculation, The strange phenomenon might have been caused by the origin ancestral symbol, and not the demon bone. After all, when he merged with the sky demons, Liang, Yi, Xing Shun, and the others did not mention any strange phenomenon. But no matter what, he was exposed. Now, he finally understood why Han Qingqiu transformed 17 years ago, and how this female immortal knew that he would appear in the Shenzhou at this time. Last question. Ling Xiao took a deep breath, his expression still calm. Senior, you're a member of the immortal race, and your cultivation is strong. Now that the immortal race controls the world, you should enjoy the respect of all races. Why do you have to do this? At this point, Ling Xiao had a rough idea of what this celestial woman was up to by setting up such a trap. Now that her physical body was shattered and the demon bone was suppressed, she could not merge the skull into her body. Or perhaps what she wanted was not a mere demon bone, but the reincarnation of the sky demon. So, she guarded this place and waited for an opportunity to possess and be reborn. But once she did that, she would become the new sky demon, and the 9 heavens would not tolerate her. Based on this female immortal's methods and temperament, she must have been a strong cultivator even in ancient times. Now that the immortal race was at its peak, why did she want to go against the heavens? Yes, I also thought that my foliaceae should be respected by all races and enjoy the glory of this golden age. The female immortal smiled bitterly, her starry eyes filled with sorrow. Back when the immortal race killed the primordial sky demon, my foliaceae was the vanguard, and all 13 ancestors died. It was a tragic battle. I thought that after the sky demon palace was destroyed and the 9 heavens were at peace, my foliaceae would be rewarded by the ancient gods and might even be given the immortal source. But who would have thought that my foliaceae would be exiled to the Azure world because we were no longer powerful? The most ridiculous thing was that my race did not even get the position of the realm master of small Kiliacosm. We were only given a few small worlds and had to bear the responsibility of suppressing the demon bone. How can I explain this to the foliaceae's ancestors? This is an insult to my foliaceae. Since the immortal race is heartless, why should I be loyal? The sky demon bone was born from the primordial origin. As long as I have your physical body, I will have the chance to become the ruler of the world. At that time, the immortal race can be destroyed with a wave of my hand. Immortal source? Ling Xiao frowned slightly, his eyes seeming to be deep in thought. It was obvious that the female immortal in front of him was resentful because of the unequal distribution of the spoils. But from her words, Ling Xiao faintly sensed a hint of a conspiracy. If he became a demon, the immortal race could be destroyed with a wave of his hand? Then how did the real sky demon die? Okay, I've said so much. Actually, it's because I'm a little hesitant. I've waited for this day for 900 years, but when it really came, I realized that becoming a demon also requires courage. The female immortal shook her head and sighed softly. But when she looked at Ling Xiao again, there was no longer any hesitation in her eyes. Ling Xiao, give your physical body to me. In this world, I will bring you back to the 9 heavens. Chapter 585. Since you've been planning this for 1,000 years, I'm sure you won't let me go so easily. So, what are you waiting for? Ling Xiao's expression was indifferent as he stared coldly at the woman before him. He didn't summon Xiong Huan and the others. After all, it would be difficult for Xiong Huan and the others to fight against this female immortal. However, since she wanted Ling Xiao's body, she wouldn't destroy it so easily. As long as she entered his soul's sea. Haha, I don't care if you're an immortal or a god. I can kill you. Buzz. Ling Xiao, no. Lord Sky Demon, I won't let you down. I'll spread darkness to the 9 heavens. The female immortal's face was filled with respect. As expected of the primordial sky demon, he was magnanimous. He knew when to pick up and when to let go. Since that's the case, I won't hold back. Vast divine power roared into the sky. Thunderclouds suddenly covered the entire immortal world, and Tao patterns appeared. Unparalleled spiritual fluctuations turned into waves that surged out, crashing down on Ling Zhao's head. However, there was no trace of panic on the young man's face. There was even a hint of playfulness in his eyes. Not only did Ling Zhao not stop this soul consciousness from entering the palace, he even suppressed the power of the primordial Panga stone and the primordial ancestral symbol. Until the female immortal's figure appeared in Ling Zhao's soul sea. The indifference on her face slowly froze, especially the majestic black palace that stood in the middle of the soul palace. It was like a pillar that supported the heavens that pierced through the void. It inexplicably caused her delicate body to tremble and her mind to ripple. The God Emperor's soul palace. Moreover, why was the soul palace's aura so strange? It had the power to suppress one's divine spirit. Also, what was with the demonic sun in the soul palace? With just one look, the female immortal felt chills all over her body. Had the entire world fallen into darkness? Buzz. An ear-piercing buzz resounded. The female immortal's soul light suddenly shone brightly. Only then did she stop the demonic intent that contained destruction. However, at this moment, her face was already filled with shock. Just one look in her soul had almost shattered. With this female immortal's experience, she naturally knew that it was extremely dangerous to enter another soul sea as a soul body. However, she was the ancestor of the Foliaceae. 1,000 years ago, she was a figure who could move unhindered through the world. How could she possibly put a 16 or 17-year-old boy in her eyes? The primordial sky demon was the strongest in the 9 heavens, but what he was strong about was his physical body. Since when was his godly soul so terrifying? Senior, are you surprised? Ling Zhao's figure sat upright on top of the soul palace as he coldly looked at the woman who stood rooted to the ground. He was no match for this immortal. In fact, in the outside world, this immortal only needed to move a finger to consign him to eternal damnation. But from the very beginning, Ling Zhao knew that she had set the stage for nothing. No matter how perfect the plan was, there would always be a flaw. Even if this female immortal had personally witnessed the primordial sky demon's unparalleled power, she had still underestimated this peerless demon that had been born at the beginning of the world. Or rather, she had calculated everything, but she had not considered that Ling Zhao had transmigrated and had the Panga stone guarding his soul sea. She had also not expected that this demon bone that she had been sealing all this time contained a strand of the sky demon's consciousness that had yet to be extinguished. Now, this strand of consciousness had evolved into the origin ancestral symbol. Even a true supremacy or saint might not be able to escape unscathed from Ling Zhao's soul sea, let alone a mere remnant soul. How is this possible? Who exactly are you? The female immortal's eyes widened, but she calmed down in an instant. No matter who you are, this body is still mine. As soon as she finished speaking, divine patterns flickered in her eyes. They looked as if they were made of gold, majestic and vast. Dazzling golden light filled heaven and earth, trying to disperse the endless darkness. Seeing this, Ling Zhao shook his head and smiled. With a thought, demonic intent spewed out from the ancestral symbol in the void, evolving into the origin Tao pattern. Then, a demonic shadow that seemed to have come from ancient times quietly stood behind Ling Zhao. Senior, if you want to kill me, I really won't be able to fight back. But you've made a mistake by underestimating the demon bone's power. Boom! The demonic shadow gradually merged with Ling Zhao's body, and the latter's figure suddenly grew several feet taller, standing at the peak of the sky. Terrifying demonic intent roared around his body, and any strand of it could transform into the birth and death of an era. And on his forehead, a black rune seemed to be carved, containing the power to destroy heaven and earth. Origin Tao pattern, primordial ancestral symbol. The female immortal exclaimed, and the golden light in her beautiful eyes trembled. Senior, thank you for protecting this demonic bone ancestral symbol for me for thousands of years. Now, give me your divine soul as well. Ling Zhao smiled faintly. Demonic light shot out from his forehead, turning into an ancient rune that fell on the female immortal's head. On the rune, countless mysterious and complex demonic patterns gradually spread out. Strand by strand, they formed a formation in the void. There seemed to be 3,000 demons roaring, and the majestic demonic aura almost tore the sky apart. The golden light around the female immortal only lasted for a moment before it was completely suppressed by the demonic intent. How is this possible? Why is the primordial ancestral symbol with you? Wasn't it destroyed by the 9 immortal sources? She couldn't figure out how this origin Tao pattern could be reborn with Ling Xiao. During the great war of immortals and demons, the immemorial sky demon killed the 9 immortal masters and 100,000 immortal soldiers with a thought. Everyone fought with their lives and released their immortal sources to completely destroy this ancestral symbol. But why did it appear in Ling Xiao's soul sea? That's right. This primordial ancestral symbol shouldn't appear with me. It's just a wisp of the ancestral symbol's remnant consciousness. But it's enough to kill you. Ling Xiao's eyes were clear as he spoke indifferently. From a moment he merged with this ancestral symbol, he knew that it wasn't complete. It was only after thousands of years of nourishment from this female immortal that a wisp of its power was awakened. Although Ling Xiao didn't know what the immortal sources she was talking about were, it was clear that although the symbol was destroyed, it didn't dissipate. Instead, it was hidden in the sky demon's divine sense. Impossible! Impossible! The female immortal screamed, looking miserable. How could she allow her plan to be destroyed so easily after thousands of years of planning? But the primordial ancestral symbol was the sky demon's companion item. It was said that this symbol contained the primordial origin and could punish the heavenly Tao. Now that she was only a wisp of her remnant soul, how could she fight against it? Since ancient times, all the people who controlled the origin ancestral symbol were the most powerful people who could set the rules of this world. How could such a powerful force be controlled by a divine overlord? To be honest, she was filled with regret. She was the ancestor of the Foliaceae with a supreme cultivation level. But in the end, she was schemed against by a divine overlord. No wonder this young man's expression was so calm from the beginning. She had thought that he had compromised with fate. But now, it seemed that he was luring her to let down her guard. If she had been more cautious and sent a wisp of her divine sense into his soul sea, she wouldn't have been in such a predicament. But it seemed that she could only fight to the death. Chapter 586. Senior, if you sacrifice your soul to me, I will redress the injustice of your Foliaceae. How about that? Ling Xiao stood with his hands behind his back, demonic intent surging in his eyes. The grand primordium rune finally covered the sky and pressed down on the female immortal. Foliaceae. Suddenly, a trace of doubt appeared in Ling Xiao's heart. Could this female immortal be related to Qing Chan? Ling Xiao still didn't fully understand the latter's background. However, she came from the upper realm and was now inextricably linked to the sacred sect. Ling Xiao had also heard the female immortal mention that the sacred sect was the guardian of this realm and was of the same race as this female immortal. Gradually, a complicated picture unfolded in front of Ling Xiao's eyes. However, it was still full of mysteries that he couldn't see clearly. If they were of the same race, then why did the sacred sect's divine master send someone to kill Qing Chan? Moreover, why was he looking for a Tao prodigy? In your dreams, Yi Luo Yun, will never lose. Just as Ling Xiao was pondering, the female immortal suddenly roared at the sky. Soul light rushed into the clouds and formed the phantom of a divine mountain. Tao patterns spread over it, transforming into forests and ancient trees. Immortal intent flowed, making it look like a divine realm. Then, she reached out with her slender hand and lifted the 1,000-foot-tall mountain, smashing it at Ling Xiao. The void shattered instantly, and terrifying divine patterns intertwined. The dark soul sea suddenly lit up as bright as day, and spatial cracks almost pierced through the sky. However, The grand primordium rune contained primordial immortal power, the origin of all realms. With Yi Luoyun's current strength, there was no way he could fight against this rune. Boom, boom. The golden mountain trembled, and the divine pattern shattered. Endless rays of light fell from the sky like the Milky Way. It was majestic, but also somewhat bleak. The instant the divine mountain and the ancient rune collided, Ling Zhao's face turned pale. An indescribable power surged in the sky above his soul sea. Thousands of Tao wills were obliterated, and there was no more black and yellow. It was like the end of the world. But in the end, when the ancient seal covered the sky and enveloped the divine mountain, a scalp-numbing sound of friction resounded. Then, cracks began to appear on the sacred mountain. Yi Liyun's eyes were instantly filled with fear and unwillingness. 900 years. She sealed her own cultivation and fell into this world. Then he used his physical body and bloodline as a seal to deceive the celestial races of the heavens, using the ground as a prison. 900 years. She abandoned her clansmen and pretended to be righteous. He betrayed the immortal race and attempted to become a demon, all for the sake of seeking justice for the ancestors of the Foliaceae. Yi Luoyun had never thought of using his demonic body to kill people. She only felt that the ancient gods were unfair and that the Foliaceae were shamed. The so-called immortals were just the clans that were bestowed with immortal opportunities by the innate spirits, and not the slave clans that they had sworn to follow with their lives. That was right. In the eyes of true immortals, they were nothing more than slaves. They simply did not have the qualifications to rule the world together with them. But in the end, it was a mistake. She could not become the immortal that led the Foliaceae to stand at the top of the world, nor could she become the demon that conquered the world with the immortal race. Yi Luoyun raised her head and looked at the crumbling sacred mountain. Her beautiful eyes were filled with unwillingness and resentment. I can't accept this. I can't accept this. Blazing soul light began to bloom from her body. An incomparably vast divine power instantly swept through the entire soul sea. If it weren't for the ancient Panga stone, Ling Xiao would most likely have been killed by this power. Even so, blood still trickled down from the corner of his mouth. Boom! Boom! Yi Luoyun screamed fiercely. The soul light around her turned into a sea that surged and poured into the crumbling sacred mountain. Even so, the ancient seal formed by the grand primordium ancient talisman still pressed down on her unhurriedly. No! No! Shrill and despairing screams continued to resound. Demonic intent surged around Ling Xiao, but his eyes were surprisingly calm. Yi Luoyun wouldn't be able to escape death, but he probably wouldn't be able to enjoy the soul of an immortal powerhouse. After all, the final counterattack of a person who had transcended this realm was bound to be earth-shattering. If he wasn't careful, he would be consigned to eternal damnation. Villains prioritize benefits above all else. However, the prerequisite for obtaining benefits was that they had to stay alive. Time passed slowly. The golden light around Yi Luoyun gradually dimmed. However, she still didn't give up. She bitterly supported the sacred mountain so that it wouldn't shatter. Otherwise, once the grand primordium ancient talisman fell, she would definitely die. However, there was still an end to her stubbornness, until an ear-piercing boom suddenly came from the void in the distance. Yi Liyun's eyes narrowed slightly as she looked toward the source of the sound. She saw Ling Xiao slashing down with the demonic blade in his hand. The heaven punishing style was formed in an instant. It transformed into a 100-foot-long saber intent that neatly cut the space into pieces. The world devastator, Tao, Law manifested thousands of avatars. Every inch of saber light seemed to shatter an immortal realm and collapse a divine palace. Crack! As for the divine mountain that supported the ancient seal, it was finally split apart by this blade and scattered into the sun. Boom! The grand primordium ancient talisman fell from the sky and completely suppressed the entire space where Yi Luoyun was. No! At the last moment, Yi Luoyun's expression was filled with despair. Her entire soul suddenly shattered as she tried to shake the grand primordium ancient talisman. However, in the end, it was forcefully shattered by the ancient talisman's destructive power. An ancient powerhouse with thousands of schemes turned into a wisp of soul energy and dissipated into nothingness. Buzz! A buzzing sound reverberated throughout the world. The Black Palace in Yi Luoyun's soul sea suddenly grew dozens of feet taller. Soul power rippled from it, as mystical runes spread out from it. Ling Zhao's eyes narrowed slightly. He sat cross-legged on the spot and tried his best to devour the scattered soul energy in his soul sea. 3 days passed in the blink of an eye. When Ling Zhao opened his eyes, there wasn't a trace of aura around him. However, the soul energy contained in his starry eyes caused the space to tremble and the sun and moon to sink. 7th stage Divine Emperor? Ling Zhao raised his head and looked at the crumbling space around him. A smile tugged at the corner of his lips. Now that his divine spirit had reached the 7th stage, ordinary divine emperors would be no match for him if he went all out. Of course, from the beginning to the end, Ling Zhao had never regarded the god emperors of this world as his opponents. In the holy state, he only had one opponent, the sacred sect's divine master. Buzz! With Yi Luoyun's death, the ancient array covering the barren mountain immediately shattered. The space trembled and dissipated into clouds. Ling Zhao's figure appeared on the mountain peak. However, there wasn't much joy on his face right now. This trip to the immortals seemed to have been fruitful, but Ling Zhao felt a new sense of danger. Yes, he'd fused with the demon bone and killed Yi Luoyun. However, if the sky demon's skull hadn't contained a wisp of the sky demon's divine will that eventually evolved into the origin ancestral symbol, he might not have been able to kill this immortal powerhouse with the ancient Panga stone alone. But at the same time, after this incident, Ling Zhao had finally witnessed a corner of the immortal dimension and understood how vast this world was. The immortals were no longer a monolithic entity. If he wanted to rise again, he would have to borrow the strength of all races. Perhaps there were many immortals like Yi Luoyun who were unwilling to accept his fate. The road to heaven had only just begun. Chapter 587. On the peak of the ancient mountain, Ling Zhao stood with his hands behind his back. His white robe shone with starlight, giving him a sense of transcendence. From Yi Luoyun's words, Ling Zhao could tell that the Shenzhou continent was indeed a cage. The Foliaceae of the Azure world were the ancient clans that guarded the cage. Since the eastern and western borders had the Demon Bone seal, the remaining northern and southern borders must also have their own destinies. But, thinking of the white-haired woman in the sky demon's mind, Ling Zhao felt an extremely complicated feeling in his heart. This feeling did not originate from his heart. It was more like the obsession of the sky demon's mind. Next, it's time to destroy the Cold Moon Celestial Palace. I wonder how many empires are left in the western border. In the end, Ling Zhao did not think too much. He put away the immortal cauldron in the ruins of the ancient palace and walked down the mountain. But before he landed, he saw Han Qing Xiao kneeling on the ground at the foot of the mountain with tears in her eyes. In front of her, there was a deep pit and a pile of yellow soil. Young master, although you are ruthless, cruel, sinister, and cunning, Qing Xiao will always remember your kindness to me. Don't worry, although you are dead, I will work hard to fulfill your wish and destroy the Holy Church as soon as possible. With that, she took out a chinquin bag from her bosom. It was the one that Ling Zhao had given her to store pills. She gently placed it in the pit. What the F****? Qing Xiao, if I'm not mistaken, you made a cenotaph for me? Cough, cough. Ling Zhao shook his head with a smile and looked at the 9th grade pill with clear eyes. Throughout the history of the Shenzhou continent, 8th grade pills were the limit of the world. It was not that the alchemists were weak, but that the world was not strong enough to support the birth of a 9th grade pill. Ling Zhao didn't know how Yi Luoyun had managed to refine this grade 9 pill. But to refine a pill in 1,000 years, Ling Zhao felt a chill in his heart. The secret of becoming an immortal. With the divine energy contained within this grade 9 spiritual pill, he might really be able to break through the shackles of the heavens and earth if he ate it. Hearing the voice, Han Qingqiu's pretty face froze. But when she raised her head and saw the determined and handsome face, her beautiful eyes narrowed. Why, young master? At this moment, Han Qingqiu had never been this excited before. In an instant, tears welled up in her eyes. Just as Ling Xiao had said, although the spirit pill had taken the form of a human, its thoughts were actually extremely simple. Revenge. Since she was willing to give up her Tao and cultivate from the beginning for the sake of Cold Moon Palace Master, she was definitely a person who valued relationships and loyalty. I've already touched her, and I've also given her my concern. It's time for my stinky sister to learn how to cooperate. Why are you crying? Ling Xiao shook his head and smiled, a gentle smile on his face. Then, before he could even react, Han Qingqiu had already turned into an afterimage and rushed into his embrace. Young master, I thought I would never see you again. I thought you had exploded along with the mountain. Isn't everything fine now? Ling Xiao gently patted Han Qingqiu's shoulder. His eyes seemed to be muttering to himself. After the initial excitement, Han Qingqiu quickly calmed down. In fact, she looked at Ling Xiao with a trace of indescribable hesitation in her eyes. Why, young master, did you see that ancient expert? Since Ling Xiao had come out alive and the mountain's formation had been completely destroyed, it was likely that that ancient expert had died. This also meant that perhaps young master already knew of her identity. Would he blame me? Or eat me? Amen. Ling Xiao nodded indifferently. The smile on his face grew wider. How could he not guess why Han Qingqiu was so nervous? However, with his current strength, even if he ate this grade 9 spiritual pill, he might not be able to break through to the first level of the God Emperor realm. Wouldn't that be a waste of the Shengzhou's only grade 9 spiritual pill? Ah, young master obtained that demonic item? That's right. Then did she say anything else? She also told me that the secret to becoming an immortal is right beside me. Qingqiu, you've been hiding it from me. Ling Zhao's eyes suddenly flashed with a trace of evil. Before Han Qingqiu could react, demonic light flashed around his body. It turned into a chain and wrapped around the girl's body. Young master. Han Qingqiu's eyes narrowed. Her face revealed a trace of despair. As expected, in this world, people were greedy. No one could resist the secret to becoming an immortal. Oh well, as long as young master eats me and avenges me, I will die without regrets. Looking at the handsome face that was gradually approaching her, Han Qingqiu's eyes calmed down. However, just as she closed her eyes and was about to accept her fate, she felt a pair of warm lips on hers. Then, the young man's hearty laughter suddenly rang in her ears. You even hid it from me. How should I punish you? My little spiritual pill? Boom! The sudden gentleness completely shattered Han Qingqiu's defenses. She opened her eyes and looked at the young man's bright smile. Her beautiful eyes gradually widened until tears rolled down her cheeks. Beep! The destined girl's mind has been shattered. She has submitted to the villain. Congratulations to the host for obtaining 1,000 luck points and 10,000 villain points. Beep! The destined girl has submitted. Additional reward. Destiny casting value 2%. 1 chance to complete the Tao Law. 1 heaven-trapping talisman, 8th grade. Hearing the notification from the system, Ling Zhao's lips curled into a playful smile. The reason why he didn't rush to take the 9th grade spiritual pill was not because he was merciful. This pill now had the same goal as him, which was to destroy the Saint sect. After all, she was the destined girl. With her by his side, there might be an unexpected surprise. After submitting, Ling Xiao would have an endless supply of destiny points. As long as his realm was high enough, Han Qingqiu could give herself to him at any time, killing 3 birds with 1 stone. Why not? Tao Law of Holy Words complete. Among the Tao laws that Ling Xiao had mastered, only the Tao Law of Holy Words and the Tao Law of Saber had not been completed. Compared to the latter, Ling Xiao felt that the Tao law of holy words seemed to be more useful. It wasn't that his words were perfect. His casual words would be believed by the world. But more or less, it had the intention of bewitching people. More importantly, this Tao law contained a trace of the original concept. It was not an evil technique. It would not be noticed by others. As a result, I, Ling Xiao, am the light of righteousness. Who doesn't believe me? Master, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have hidden it from you. Without you, I can still reach the peak of the world. So, you don't have to worry. With me here, no one can hurt you. Ling Xiao reached out and hugged Han Qingqiu. This time, the girl took the initiative to stand on her tiptoes and kissed Ling Xiao's lips. The demonic aura around him dissipated. Han Qingqiu's beautiful face had an inexplicable look of anticipation. Boom! The originally cold and desolate mountain suddenly had the feeling of spring. The two figures intertwined together and kissed passionately. At this moment, Han Qingqiu's heart no longer had a trace of shyness and resentment. Even the hatred in her heart was gradually melted by the warmth in the youth's arms, until the spiritual aura rippled in the sky. The two turned their heads and looked at the distant mountain. In the deepest part of the immortal world, the space began to collapse. The clear sky turned into an abyss. Obviously, after losing the seal of Yi Luo Yun's divine power, this world was on the verge of collapse. It's time to go out. Ling Xiao smiled gently. Han Qingqiu nodded and snuggled in the youth's arms, allowing him to carry her towards the entrance of the immortal world. Chapter 588. Cold Moon, Celestial Mountain, the entrance of the immortal world. 3 months were almost up. However, at this moment, there was not the slightest bit of movement coming from the entrance. The Cold Moon Palace master frowned and stood in front of the spiritual spiral with her hands behind her back. There was a trace of worry in her eyes. Now that the situation in the western border had changed drastically, the primitive emperor had wiped out the remaining 6 dynasties in a short span of 3 months with the momentum of sweeping away thousands of troops. Only the Great Qin Empire relied on the city defense array in Jingyang City and the 2 peerless generals, Ning Tiance and Xiao Beifa, to defend the city and not be wiped out by the Yuan Emperor. At the same time, the news about the Yuan Emperor turning into an evil demon spread like wildfire. Some said that he could refine corpses into an army and control the souls of the dead. Some said that he was a strong cultivator of the dark underworld, and his subordinates were all ghosts. There were even rumors that a fierce demon had appeared in the western border recently. It was good at demonic arts and could turn mountains into seas. It could swallow thousands of people in one bite. Regardless, rumors spread in the western border, and everyone was in a state of panic. Cultivators and civilians rushed into the Cold Moon Celestial Mountain, hoping to be protected by the Celestial Palace. However, Ren Yueying found it unbelievable when she heard all kinds of rumors. Before the opening of the immortal world, she had received orders from the divine envoy to go to the great Yuan Empire and ask Yuan Gu to welcome him. Then, the divine envoy arrived, and there must be some instructions. But why did the Yuan Emperor suddenly turn into an evil demon, using corpses as the Tao? No matter how she thought about it, it didn't seem like a righteous method. Could it be that the divine envoy? Suddenly, Ren Yueying felt a chill at her heart. It shouldn't be. All these years, the Saint sect had been looking for talented cultivators of the Tao Law, but only brought them to the central border sacred ground to cultivate. But now, the divine envoy had just gone to the great Yuan Empire, and the emperor of this dynasty had turned into an evil demon? No one would believe you if you said that there was no connection between the two. But boom! Just as the Cold Moon Palace Master was puzzled, she saw a terrifying wave of energy ripple at the entrance of the immortal world. Then, all the elders of the Cold Palace were stunned to see that in the fairy world, the spirit mountain collapsed, the ancient forest was broken, and even the sky was broken like ice crystals. Whoosh! Just as the spiritual spiral was about to collapse, a white-robed figure flashed out and appeared at the peak of the immortal mountain. At this time, Ling Zhao's face was also pale. In his arms, Han Qingqiu's face was lifeless, as if she had suffered a great blow. Young master? Qingqiu. Boom! The entire mountain trembled for a moment. Shortly after, the originally towering celestial gate collapsed on its own until it completely disappeared. What happened? To be honest, Ren Yueying felt somewhat uneasy at this moment. The Divine Master had arranged for her to stay here for the sake of obtaining the fortune to become an immortal in this place. But from the looks of it, the immortals seemed to have shattered. What the F***CK? Palace Master, gather all the elders and disciples. Cold Moon Celestial Palace is in great trouble. Ling Zhao's tone was gloomy, and his eyes were solemn. Ren Yueying only felt a cold air rising from the bottom of her feet, and in the blink of an eye, it had reached the top of her head. Given Ling Zhao's status, let alone the western border, even in the entire Xingzhou, he could be considered one of the best. Because behind him stood an 8th-grade divine emperor, divine envoy of the sacred sect. But now, he said, Cold Palace was in great trouble? Young master, what the hell happened? Ren Yueying swallowed hard. She felt that the sky of the western border was about to change. We have all been deceived. Palace Master, Yu Shao colluded with the true demon and entered the secret realm. She also has a strange token that can resist the seal of the immortals. Ling Xiao sighed softly. Taoist rhymes surged around him. Obviously, he was extremely angry. What he said now was half true and half false. It was impossible for Ren Yueying not to know that Yu Shao had entered the immortals. After all, there were many strong cultivators guarding the entrance of the immortals, unless they were blind, or even, according to Han Qingqiu, Ren Yueying had been looking for the Cold Moon ancient token. Therefore, she probably knew the use of the token. No one was a fool. How could they believe a lie without some truth? And then, young master, tell me, but how could Yu Shao bring disaster to the Cold Moon Celestial Palace? Not to mention the divine envoy. Even she was powerful enough to kill her. Now that the immortals' world was destroyed, once the divine master blames her, she would not be able to escape punishment. Therefore, someone must take the blame for this disaster. I don't know what method she used to bring Xia Feng into the ruins. Xia Feng. This time, Ren Yueying was even more confused. She didn't even take Yu Shao seriously, so it was a mere Xia Feng to her. Moreover, with young master's strength, killing Xia Feng should be easy, right? That's right. Palace Master, you should know that the great demon is sealed in the immortals' world, right? As soon as Ling Zhao's voice fell, Ren Yueying's face turned pale. Young master, you mean Xia Feng is the reincarnation of the great demon. Yu Shao colluded with the great demon. The two of them entered the ruins and released the great demon. Xia Feng's strength has also awakened. Ling Xiao was disappointed and frustrated. He gritted his teeth. If I knew this would happen, I would not have left this scourge alive. Ren Yueying was stunned and did not speak for a long time. At this time, she did not dwell on how the great demon, Xia Feng, Yu Shao, and the others escaped from the immortals' world. After all, the ancient great demon's methods were not something she could understand. Moreover, when Xia Feng appeared on the peak of the Cold Moon Mountain, didn't he rely on the great demon's spatial teleportation technique? She just did not expect that things would fall into such a situation. Now that the great demon broke free from the seal, the first one he would take revenge on would be the Cold Moon Immortal Palace that suppressed him. No wonder young master said that the Immortal Palace would be in trouble. F***CK. Young master, why are you still hesitating? Hurry up and summon the divine envoy to protect the Immortal Palace together. However, Palace Master need not worry. That great demon is alone and without help. I have already sent a message to the divine envoy. He should be here soon. Ling Xiao smiled indifferently. Ren Yueying had just heaved a sigh of relief when her eyes suddenly narrowed. Alone and without help? It was widely rumored that the primitive emperor was an evil demon and that he had contact with the divine envoy. Suddenly, Ren Yueying had a bold guess in her heart. Could it be that the divine envoy had already joined hands with the evil demon? Otherwise, why didn't the divine envoy ask about the primitive emperor's strange method of turning corpses into generals? It couldn't be, right? The divine envoy of the sacred sect was only below one person and above millions. In the Shangzhou continent, the divine envoy was the embodiment of God's will. How could he collude with the great demon and slaughter living beings? Once this matter was known by the divine master, it would be difficult for His Excellency to die. No, there was another possibility. When a divine envoy went to the Yuan dynasty, he had already been killed by the evil demon. Ren Yueying's eyes narrowed, and her body could not help but tremble. It seemed that, after the immortal's world opened, His Excellency had completely disappeared. Young master, you sent a message to His Excellency. Did His Excellency reply? Ren Yueying's eyes were filled with expectation, but Ling Zhao's expression gradually froze. His Excellency has not replied yet. Palace Master, did something happen in the western border? Chapter 589. Gulp. The entire cold moon, celestial mountain, suddenly fell into a dead silence. Especially Ren Yueying, whose eyes were filled with intense fear. No way. The divine envoy was an 8th-grade god emperor. Even in the entire Xingzhou, only those old monsters who had lived for more than 1,000 years had the ability to kill him, let alone the Shijian. Monsters? Impossible. Monsters had always been at odds with humans, but now that the divine master's cultivation was supreme, as long as the monsters had a brain, they would not dare to attack the divine envoy. But other than the monsters, who else could kill an 8th-grade divine emperor silently? Sea Tribe, looking at Ren Yueying, who stood rooted to the ground, a sinister look flashed across Ling Zhao's eyes. From a moment folded shadow went to Yin, he had already thought of a countermeasure to deal with Cold Moon, Celestial Palace, and the divine envoy. Soon, he would set off for the southern border, where a divine envoy of the saint was guarding. Ling Xiao deduced that the remaining 6 demons should be hiding in the southern border from the knife demon's memory. But it would take time to find them. In that case, why not give the divine envoy some fun first? The Sea Tribe had many experts, and even the saint was wary of them. Moreover, this tribe lived in the endless deep sea all year round and had never liked humans. In addition, the saint was unable to control the complicated terrain of the deep sea even if they wanted to. This was the reason why the southern border was relatively free. Barbarians, foreign tribes, demonic cultivators, and evil spirits all liked to live in seclusion in the southern border to escape the punishment of the saint. Folded Shadow did not appear as the divine envoy in the past few months because he had gone to the southern border. After all, although the great demon was good at transformation, he had to have a model. With her strength, wasn't it easy for her to disguise as an expert of the Sea Tribe? That was the reason why the fierce demon suddenly appeared in the western border. The plot was roughly like this. The primitive emperor hid his demonic body and was discovered by the divine envoy who went to the Yin. The leader of the 8 emperors joined forces with the Sea Tribe and the true demon to kill the primitive emperor and then slaughtered the western border in an attempt to overthrow the saint. Everything was flawless. The layout had to be prepared from several chapters ago. Otherwise, it would appear to be sloppy and forced. Ling Xiao, maybe a chess piece in the eyes of some supreme experts. But who said that chess pieces could not be arranged? One day, when all the chess pieces were placed, it would be the time when the demonic sun would change the sky and the universe would be reversed. You call this cowardice? Yi Luoyun alone had been planning for 900 years. In this world, the truly terrifying ones were never the monstrous geniuses with the heavenly mandate realm, but those who had lived for countless years. Not only in terms of strength, but also in terms of intelligence, they could be said to be close to demons. Palace Lord, what's wrong? Ling Zhao's brows furrowed slightly, and there was also a trace of panic on his face. Young master, ever since you entered the Cold Moon immortal world for 3 months, my lord has never appeared, nor has he sent any messages to me. Furthermore, The Cold Moon Palace master wanted to say something, but hesitated. Although her guess was somewhat crazy. These days, Yushao had joined forces with the demon and entered the immortals to save the great demon. What crazy things couldn't happen? In fact, ever since the day Lord Divine Envoy went to the great Yuan Empire, there has been no news of him. What? Palace Lord, you mean? Ling Xiao sneered in his heart, but the panic on his face was just right. But in the next moment, he shook his head slightly. Impossible. My lord is an 8th grade great emperor, who in the entire western border could kill him silently. My lord must have been delayed by something important. Acting, I, Ling Xiao, am not targeting anyone. Everyone in the Shengzhou is trash. Young master, there are rumors in the western border recently that the primitive emperor used corpses as soldiers and destroyed the 6 great empires. Moreover, it is said that a fierce demon appeared in the western border and turned the mountains into seas. I guess, perhaps, the primitive emperor was originally an evil demon and joined forces with the sea race to kill my lord. Ren Yueying sighed softly, and there was despair on her face. If Yushao and Xiaofeng really did release the great demon from the immortals, Frigid Moon Celestial Palace would be doomed. From the beginning, Ren Yueying knew that although Yushao seemed to have no desires, she had been brooding about the death of the previous palace lord of the Cold Moon Immortal Palace. Originally, Ren Yueying wanted to wait for Yushao to bring out the opportunity to become an immortal from the immortals. Who knew? Her goal was the great demon from the immortals. Damn, wasn't this the same as shooting himself in the foot? What? The primitive emperor is an evil demon? And how could the sea race have such guts? Ling Zhao's face turned pale, and his eyes were filled with horror. Seeing the despair on his face, Ren Yueying's heart trembled, and she asked tentatively, Young master, the only thing we can do now is to stay away from the limelight for now, and then report to the immortal master and wait for his decision. No, before the matter is clear, if we abandon the Cold Moon Immortal Palace and the people of the western border and run away, we will be ridiculed by the righteous faction, Ling Xiao said sternly, and there seemed to be immortal qi circulating around him. Hearing this, the elders of the Cold Moon Immortal Palace felt a sense of awe. See, this is our righteous faction's outstanding talent. Calm in the face of danger, with the people of the world as his wish, even in the face of such an evil demon, he still has perseverance. Lord Ling Xiao, you are righteous. You deserve to be erected, praised, and worshipped by the people of the world. What are you waiting for? Lick him. Young master, you don't know. If the sea race is really involved in this matter, I'm afraid even the immortal master will have a headache. Ren Yueying shook her head and smiled bitterly. Although there was respect for Ling Xiao in her eyes, there was a trace of helplessness. Now that the immortal master was dead, this immortal master was the will of the holy sect. If he did not leave, Ren Yueying would not dare to act rashly. But when she thought that even the immortal master was killed silently, she felt an inexplicable chill in her heart. Oh, the sea race is so fierce? Ling Xiao raised his eyebrows slightly. He had heard of this overlord of the southern border before. However, looking at Ren Yueying's concern, it seemed that he had underestimated the strength of the sea race. It's more than fierce. The sea race is originally a branch of the demon race, but they live in the deep sea and live on the sea. They have never put the human race in their eyes. Moreover, according to what I know, the ancestors of the sea race appeared earlier than the demon race. Some of them have even more terrifying cultivation. Young master, there's no time to lose. Let's report to the immortal master first. Ren Yueying looked anxious. Obviously, she was extremely worried about the current situation. But, how can I report to the immortal master? I'm not really a member of the holy sect. Palace master. After all, I'm a disciple that the immortal master recruited after coming to the western border. This matter should be handled by Palace Master. Ling Xiao nodded indifferently. His eyes were cold. Even if the experts of the sea race come, they will not be a match for the holy sect in the western border. Palace Master, quickly contact the holy sect and ask the immortal master to send experts to kill the demons. With the distance between the central border and the western border, even an immortal master would need time to come. And in 3 to 5 days, Ling Xiao would have a way to completely eliminate the Cold Moon Immortal Palace and the Immortal Master. At that time, all the blame would be pushed to the sea race and the primitive emperor. I, Ling Xiao, will guard the Immortal Palace, protect the common people, promote the will of the holy sect, and be respected by the world. Chapter 590. The Cold Moon Palace Master looked like she was in a difficult position. In the end, she gritted her teeth and said, "I'll try." With her status, she did not have the qualifications to contact the Divine Master. Otherwise, she would be overstepping her authority. But now that the situation was critical, she could not care so much. Palace Master, open the great array and let the people and cultivators of the western border in. Let's fight against the evil together. I'll go out and look for the divine envoy. Ling Xiao looked at Han Qingqiu with a serious expression. Young master, you can't. Now that the western border is in chaos, it's fine. My cultivation is not high, so I shouldn't be targeted. Now that the situation is critical, I can't care so much. Ling Xiao shook his head. Although his figure was a little thin, in the eyes of the experts of the Cold Moon Palace, he had a different kind of strength. Sacrificing oneself for righteousness. This was an act of sacrificing oneself for righteousness. Inexplicably, the eyes of countless elders turned red, as if they were about to cry. At this time of crisis, they finally understood why this young man was accepted as a disciple by the divine envoy. Regardless of cultivation or talent, this young man's character was enough to change the world. Young master, why don't I go with you? An elder of the Cold Palace volunteered to protect Ling Xiao. No need. The more people there are, the greater the risk of being exposed. I think even Yu Xiao and Xiafeng would not expect me to come out at this time. Ling Xiao's expression was resolute. He turned around and rushed down the mountain. The mountain wind gradually became cold, piercing the bone marrow. But looking at the young man walking on the mountain path, the hesitation in the hearts of the elders of the Cold Palace dissipated. Only in times of great calamity could one show the true colors of genius. In this chaotic world, with a peerless genius like Lord Ling Xiao, what was there to be afraid of? Lord Ling Xiao, we are willing to call you the #1 genius of the western border. No, it was a ray of light from the Shengzhou. This scene made everyone's blood boil. Elders, now is the time of life and death for the Cold Moon Palace. Lord Ling Xiao has set an example for us. Next, there will be a tough battle. As long as we can hold on until the Divine Master arrives, the evil demons will bow their heads. Ren Yuang took a deep breath and looked at the white figure that disappeared at the end of her line of sight. In the end, she did not dare to hesitate and walked towards the main hall at the top of the mountain. Shengzhou, central border. At the peak of the sacred sect, the saint of the sacred sect stood with his hands behind his back. His face was covered by the celestial clouds, and no one could see his face clearly. At this moment, her chest and hair were tied up, making her look like a teenager. Beside him, an old man with white hair and a beard frowned. Holy Sun, the Cold Moon Palace Master has sent news that a demon has appeared in the western border and has joined forces with the sea race to kill the 4th divine envoy. First Elder, what do you think we should do? The name of the holy child of the saint was Meng Yuan, a name personally bestowed by the Divine Master. However, no one in the saint knew about her background. At that moment, Meng Yuan's eyes were calm, and there was no sign of panic. It was as if the death of the divine envoys had nothing to do with her. Divine Envoy Partridge's cultivation is already that of a rank 8 martial emperor. Logically, even if he were to be killed by someone, it would be impossible for him to remain silent. This matter is very strange. The old man shook his head, and the doubt on his face deepened. Just a few days ago, the Divine Master suddenly issued an order to the Holy Child of the Sacred Sect. The Holy Child would be in charge of the Sacred Sect, and he would be in charge of all matters. In his opinion, This should be the Divine Master's test for his personal disciple, or rather, a trial. After all, the Holy Child was extremely talented, and the Divine Master had personally appointed him as the next successor of the sacred sect. He entered the sacred sect at the age of 1 and was personally taught by the Divine Master. For 19 years, the sacred sect only knew that the Holy Child was extremely talented, but they had never seen his true appearance. Now, the Divine Master had retired, and the Holy Child had appeared. It was more like a transfer of power. The fourth Divine Envoy is not dead. Meng Yuan's tone was calm as she looked into the distance. This was what made her feel the strangest. All the divine envoys and elders of the sacred sect had left a wisp of their soul consciousness in the divine token. If the fourth divine envoy had died, she would know. But now, Partridge's soul consciousness had disappeared without a trace. Therefore, Meng Yuan guessed that the fourth divine envoy was not dead but just trapped somewhere. Holy Child, you mean? The old man's eyes narrowed slightly. There seemed to be Taoist rhymes circulating around him, and the entire world was inexplicably stirred. Then he seemed to have thought of something and nodded slightly. It seems that something has happened in the western border. Holy Child, please allow me to go to the western border to investigate the truth. No need. The Great Elder still needs to stay at the Tao Comprehension Mountain. I will go to the Cold Moon Celestial Palace personally. After saying that, Meng Yuan did not hesitate at all. She lifted her foot and headed down the mountain. Third Elder, Fourth Elder, come with me. Yes. The old man was about to dissuade her when he saw a spiritual light flickering in the void. Two figures descended from the sky and followed closely behind Meng Yuan. These two elders were both 7th-grade divine emperors, and they were extremely powerful. With the two of them accompanying her, the Holy Child's life would not be in danger. At the foot of the Cold Moon Celestial Mountain, Ling Xiao spread out his soul consciousness. After confirming that no one was following him, he headed toward the distant mountain. Master! The overlapping figure appeared from the void and bowed to Ling Xiao. You have done well. From Ren Yuang's words, Ling Xiao could easily guess that the ferocious demon that suddenly appeared must be the illusion of the overlapping figure. In this way, the demons and the sea race teamed up to kill the divine emissary. This was enough to make the holy sect suspicious for a long time. Of course, the sea race did not do such a thing. Even if they did, they would never admit it. This was the key to the success of Ling Xiao's plan. Master, these few days, the holy sect has been trying to contact the divine emissary through the divine order, but I have not responded. The overlapping figure stood up with a solemn expression. Originally, she did not know much about the holy sect. However, the longer she stayed in the western border, the more she understood how terrifying this force was. Not to mention the 4 great divine emissaries and the 7 great elders. Just the divine master alone was an invincible existence in the lower realm. Master's plan was very risky. It's okay. The Hanyu Palace Master has already sent a message to the Saint Cult, and presumably, the experts of the Saint Cult will arrive soon. What we need to do is to set up a cloud of suspicion. At that time, we only need to place the divine order in the hands of the primitive emperor, and those people of the Saint Cult will come up with the most reasonable explanation. Ling Xiao's lips curled into a gentle smile. The premise of driving the wolves to devour the tiger was that there must be enough wolves. Only then could they devour the tiger. The Cold Moon Immortal Palace had a deep foundation. With Ling Xiao's strength, although it was not impossible to destroy the Cold Moon Immortal Palace, he would definitely suffer heavy losses. Now, Partridge Gully was sure that Ren Yuang had joined the Sky Demon. What he needed to do was to ask the divine emissary to lead the real demons to destroy the Cold Moon Immortal Palace. When the experts of the Holy Sect arrived and saw the Cold Moon Immortal Mountain occupied by the primitive emperor, as well as him, who was leading the Great Qin's generals to kill the demon, do you think they would be moved to tears? Haha! Of course, if the one who came was not the Divine Master or a 9th-grade God Emperor, it would be difficult for them to return from the western border. The Holy Sect had a deep foundation and many experts. Ling Xiao was naturally happy to kill one more. As for the reason for all these disputes, The opportunity to become an immortal was the best explanation. Every man for himself, and the devil takes the hindmost. Who in the Shengzhou would not be tempted by the temptation of becoming an immortal? Chapter 591. Great Qin, Imperial City. Qin Wushuang stood on top of the city wall dressed in a bright red imperial robe. Next to him, Xiao Beifa, Ning Tiance, and the others stood with their hands behind their backs. All of them carried a solemn expression. Beneath the city wall, waves of soldiers wearing different types of armor were lowering their heads and slowly walking towards the upright Sun City step by step. Currently, there was not a single trace of life from their bodies. Most of them had broken limbs. Those pairs of flickering scarlet eyes connected together and made people feel a chill from the bottom of their heart. Further away, millions of corpse soldiers occupied the end of one sight. Endless and majestic, they advanced wave after wave. Imperial Emperor, I am afraid this city protection formation will not last much longer. Why don't you open the formation and let me out? Xiao Beifa's eyes were ruthless, and there seemed to be battle intent circulating around his body. No, Ning Tiance shook his head. Although he revealed a bitter expression, the light in his eyes was extremely determined. Little brother, Xiao sent a message to defend the upright Sun City to the death. General Xiao, please don't be impulsive. But once these demons break through the formation, I am afraid the entire upright Sun City will be plunged into misery and suffering. Xiao Beifa gritted his teeth fiercely. After being in the army for dozens of years, it was his first time seeing such evil things. They did not fear death, or in other words, they were already dead. Surrounded by ghostly qi, they killed with their instincts. Now, Xiao Beifa could recognize that these corpse soldiers before the upright Sun City came from different dynasties. This point could be seen from the armor on their bodies. Clearly, these should be the soldiers killed by the primitive emperor when he conquered the 6 dynasties. But how exactly did they end up in such a state? Stop arguing, let's wait. Qin Wushuang frowned lightly, and his eyes were filled with coldness. Perhaps others did not know, but she knew the origin of these corpse soldiers. Initially, when she had just ascended the throne, she led the army to fight against the enemy. She had used this ghostly technique to slaughter nearly 1 million soldiers from the 4 dynasties. Only at that time, Qin Wupa had said that this technique must not be known by others, or else there would be a disaster. This was the origin of the name Unparalleled Demon Emperor. In that battle, Qin Wushuang returned alone. 200,000 soldiers of the Qin and 800,000 soldiers of the enemy had all died on the battlefield. No wonder Ling Xiao had sent a message saying that there would be changes in the western border. The primitive emperor was Qin Wupa's backer. From the looks of it, that was indeed the case. Boom! Just as Qin Wushuang had finished speaking, suddenly, a surge of terrifying presence shot to the sky from the end of the corpse soldiers. After that, everyone was dumbstruck when they saw a middle-aged man in a golden robe with a ghastly pale countenance standing in midair. Boundless ghost qi coiled around his body, causing him to seem like a devil that had descended into the world, and he was ghastly and evil. The space in the surrounding 50 kilometers had formed a region of its own. There seemed to be layer upon layer of ghostly figures within it, and the howls of demons and devils caused the clear sky and bright sun to be slightly chilly for no reason. It's the primitive emperor. The eyes of Qin Wushuang and the others congealed slightly as a trace of astonishment appeared on their faces. Although the crowd wasn't familiar with the primitive emperor, but as the emperor of the 1st dynasty in the western border, his image had long been deeply ingrained in the hearts of the people. Dignified and upright, he had the potential to be an ancient emperor. But now, as they looked at the middle-aged man with a gloomy expression and a ghastly pale complexion, a wisp of shock appeared in everyone's eyes. 7th stage God Emperor. However, what was even more shocking was that Emperor De Yuan's cultivation had broken through to level 7 realm at this time. For your information, in the entire western border, the seventh stage was already the peak. Before this, only Cold Moon Palace's director Yueying had reached this level. Therefore, the Cold Moon Celestial Palace was independent of the 8 dynasties and possessed the immortal world. It seems that the primitive emperor is planning to fight to the death with the Great Qin. Ning Tian's sighed lightly as ruthlessness flashed in his eyes. Then, he turned to look at Xiao Beifa, and a trace of a smile suddenly appeared on his face. I've heard that General Zhao's combat power is unparalleled and extraordinary. Why don't you join forces with me today and fight against this devil? Yes, battle god Ning. Xiao Beifa nodded indifferently as blood surged around his body and dyed the heaven and earth in the same color. Apparently, he was ready to make a move. Ling Xiao, will this be an eternal farewell? Qin Wushuang raised his head and looked at the group of great primordial emperor standing in the distance. A wisp of confusion flashed across his pretty face. Calculating the time, the 3-month period was up, and the trip to the immortal world should be ending soon. However, facing a 7th-stage divine emperor and a group of corpse soldiers and corpse generals who only knew how to kill, the Great Qin had no chance of winning. Could it be that he really had to perform that ghost technique, giving him a taste of his own medicine? Now, the best way Qin Wushuang could think of to fight against the primitive emperor was to summon the souls of the dead here to fight against the 1,000,000 corpse soldiers. Then, Ning Tian's and Xiao Beifa would lead the Great Qin soldiers to kill the primitive emperor. However, in this way, her ending would be no different from the devil. Forget it. Perhaps this is my fate. Qin Wushuang sighed inwardly, and a pair of ghostly blue evil light suddenly lit up in his eyes. However, just as the ghost aura quietly dispersed outside her body, the primitive emperor in the midair suddenly turned his head to look in the direction of the distant sky. Then, before anyone could react, his figure had already disappeared above the void. The 1,000,000 corpse soldiers that originally surrounded the Zhengyang city also slowly turned around and walked towards the center of the western border. This, Ning Tian's and the others looked at each other, and only Qin Wushuang secretly heaved a sigh of relief. At the foot of the cold moon mountain, Ling Xiao stood before an ancient forest and looked at the immortal mountain shrouded in a formation in the distance. He had planted a soul seal in the primitive emperor's soul sea. Therefore, regardless of whether he broke through to the 7th or 8th stage, he was essentially a puppet, the kind that took the blame for death. Soon, a chilly wind whistled between heaven and earth, and the entire ancient forest seemed to have fallen into darkness in an instant. In the void, the primitive emperor's figure emerged, and his pale and thin face looked somewhat ghostly. "Greetings, master. Get up. Do you know what to do?" Ling Zhao's expression was indifferent as he extended his hand and handed the divine token to Yuan Emperor. "Don't worry, master." The primitive emperor bowed and put away the divine badge, and the spiritual light around him suddenly flourished. Behind him, a group of great primordial divine emperors appeared one after another without any expression on their faces. Just in case, they were now completely controlled by the primitive emperor. Boom! Vast spiritual power surged to the sky, and above the ancient forest, calamity clouds gathered and thunder wandered. At this moment, Ling Xiao suddenly soared into the sky, and the spiritual light outside his body was resplendent. A black ancient pagoda was formed out of thin air and suppressed the primitive emperor. Boom! Thousands of miles of forest turned into ashes in an instant. The earth crumbled, and a deep ravine appeared. However, at this moment, in the ancient pagoda, a trace of contempt flashed across Feng Ling's little face. She waved her jade-like hand gently and removed the silver light that wrapped around the cauldron. "Humph, Ling Xiao, I have helped you again. Don't forget what you promised me." Clang! The violent impact instantly smashed the cauldron to the ground. Among them, a trace of surprise flashed across Partridge Lee's eyes. At this moment, he seemed to feel that the seal outside the cauldron was gradually dissipating. Chapter 592. Clang. Another wave of spiritual pressure rushed over, causing the cauldron to roll. Excitement flashed in Partridge Lee's eyes. Could it be that Ling Xiao was fighting with someone? Yes, that must be it. Otherwise, why would the seal on the cauldron gradually disappear? He must be in big trouble. Clang! Clang! After several collisions, the seal on the cauldron was finally weakened to the extreme. Partridge Lee gritted his teeth, and his soul shone brightly. He turned into a stream of light and rushed out of the crack. Boom! With the seal broken, Partridge Lee's aura also weakened a little. However, the moment his figure appeared in the cauldron, his entire soul body began to tremble. An indescribably terrifying aura descended from the sky, as if it was going to kill him. Damn it! Can this pagoda suppress the soul? No wonder that bastard Ling Xiao trapped me here. Partridge Lee wanted to cry, but had no tears. He turned around and was about to return to the cauldron. Damn it! What can I do? I also want to escape. But with my current strength, I'm afraid I'll break the pagoda before it does. However, at this moment, Partridge Lee clearly saw a corpse lying on the ground in the corner of the ancient pagoda. There was no sign of life around it. The fourth divine envoy hesitated for a moment, and then sent his soul into the young man's body. At the same time, the terrifying suppression disappeared without a trace. However, before Partridge Lee left his heart for too long, his expression inexplicably froze. At this moment, he seemed to feel that this body contained a great amount of demonic intent. Damn it, he actually possessed a demonic body. In the ancient forest, Ling Xiao's lips curled into a smile. Long before the primitive emperor arrived, he had asked Feng Ling to cooperate with him by using a 7th-grade elixir as the price. Of course, a 7th-grade elixir was extremely painful for Ling Xiao. But compared to the foundation of the cold Moon Immortal Palace, the elixir was worth it. After all, Partridge Lee was the 4th divine envoy of the Holy Church, and his wisdom was far beyond that of ordinary people. If he wanted to invite him into the game, it would be impossible to do so without paying a price. In the end, Ling Xiao let out a furious roar. Divine radiance surged from his body, and the ancient glazed pagoda expanded to 100 feet in size, shrouding the primitive emperor and the others. In the space of the pagoda, Partridge Gully's eyes narrowed when he saw the sudden appearance of Yuan Emperor and the others. Especially at this time, the trace of evil fluctuation on the latter's body made the divine emissary feel cold both physically and mentally. Although he was in control of Xia Feng's body, his strength was greatly restricted. With the strength of this body, he could at most unleash 70 to 80% of his original body's strength. And these people in front of him were actually all god emperors. Suddenly, Partridge Gully's eyes narrowed as a trace of bitterness appeared in his heart. So fast. How did Ling Xiao detect the changes in the tower so quickly? Who are you? But, to Partridge Gully's surprise, the primitive emperor was not in a hurry to make a move. Instead, he was looking at him with a guarded expression. Evil demon, you deserve to die. Partridge Gully snorted coldly as the golden radiance around his body gradually lit up. However, Ling Xiao had already placed a demonic seal in this body. Therefore, as the golden radiance spread, there was also a trace of black radiance faintly discernible. Demon, you're a demon. Damn it, attack. Kill this devil. The primitive emperor roared. Partridge Gully instinctively urged his spiritual energy and formed a divine seal in front of him. Wait a minute. What did he say? I'm a demon? He wants to kill a demon? Suddenly, Partridge Gully was somewhat confused. He originally thought that these people in front of him must be Ling Xiao's henchmen who entered the pagoda to kill him. But judging from the meaning of his words, it seemed that was not the case. You're not Ling Xiao's accomplices? Partridge Gully stretched out his hand and stopped the primitive emperor and the others who were about to attack. Ling Xiao's accomplices? I am the Yuan Emperor Yuan Gexing. That Ling Xiao true demon tricked me into planting a demonic seal, turning me into this inhuman and ghostly appearance. I came here to kill him. How could I be his accomplice? The primitive emperor roared, his eyes filled with killing intent. You also know that Ling Xiao is a demon? Hearing this, Partridge Gully's body trembled as if he had met a confidant. A heartfelt smile unconsciously appeared on his face. Finally, he met someone who knew the truth. In this way, even if his body was destroyed and his divine token was taken away, he would not be afraid of being misunderstood by the world. Of course I know. Not only do I know that Ling Xiao is a demon, but I also know that the Hanyu Palace Master is in cahoots with a demon and is plotting to become an immortal in the immortal world. The primitive emperor frowned slightly, looking somewhat puzzled. Who are you? Why are you suppressed here by Ling Xiao? I am the fourth divine envoy of the sacred sect, Partridge Gully. Ling Xiao? Suppress me? Humph, if not for sect master Taishuan's interference. How could a mere divine overlord be my opponent? Partridge Gully's face was filled with grief and indignation. He had already made up his mind. As long as he could get out of this predicament, he would immediately return to the central border and report this matter to the divine master. No matter what price he had to pay, he must kill sect master Taishan. Divine overlord? The primitive emperor was stunned, and the coldness in his heart grew stronger. At this moment, his every word and action was controlled by the soul's seal. But his consciousness was still intact, and he could still think. However, how old was Ling Xiao? How could he be a divine overlord expert? Moreover, what was even more frightening was that such a scheming demon who played the entire western border in the palm of his hand actually hid his cultivation. Damn! Suddenly, the primitive emperor seemed to have seen his end. Sob, I also want to struggle, but I really can't do it. At this moment, the primitive emperor finally understood the whole story. He was afraid that this divine messenger had been killed by Ling Xiao long ago. That was why the evil demon who came to the UN later used the divine order to impart evil skills to him and planted the soul seal. However, at this point, he had no other choice. Even if things were to happen again, he still wouldn't dare to have a trace of doubt towards the fake divine messenger who held the divine order. This was the power of the sacred sect to control the four borders. Especially for the human forces, the sacred sect was like the power of the heavens. Anyone who dared to have a trace of disobedience would only end up with their entire clan being slaughtered. So, it's the divine messenger. Sir, you must uphold justice for the people of the western border. The primitive emperor suddenly knelt on the ground, and his eyes were red. The last trace of vigilance on Partridge Lee's face finally dissipated. With the strength of these people in front of him, although they might not be able to kill him, there was no need for them to be so humble. Moreover, this was the place where Ling Xiao suppressed his enemies. If he didn't fight with them today, Partridge Lee wouldn't have a chance to escape. Obviously, the primitive emperor and others were also pitiful people who were deceived by the true demon. Humph, as long as I can walk out of here, I will skin Ling Xiao alive and make him into a doll. Chapter 593. My lord, that Ling Xiao was injured by me just now. He won't be able to escape this calamity today. Primitive Emperor's eyes were gloomy as he looked at this space. According to my speculation, he most likely went to Cold Moon Immortal Palace to seek protection. Originally, Cold Moon Immortal Palace? Partridge Lee's eyes narrowed as he pondered for a moment. You mean, with my lord's strength, it shouldn't be a problem to deal with Ren Yueying, right? Primitive Emperor probed. Partridge Lee nodded lightly. If it was in the past, I could kill her with a wave of my hand. But now, I'm afraid it will take some effort. That's good. My lord only needs to kill Ren Yueying and leave the rest of the Cold Moon Immortal Palace elders to me. I don't believe that my lord and I can't kill these demons with our strength. Primitive Emperor shouted coldly as his Emperor aura suppressed the world, giving Partridge Lee some confidence. If he returned to the sacred sect now, he would inevitably be punished by the Divine Master. Not only did he let Yi Qing-chan escape, but he also let the Sky Demon and Ren Yueying join forces to swallow the immortal ascension fortune in the immortal world. As long as he could kill the reincarnation of the Sky Demon, It would be a great merit. Presumably, even if the Divine Master blamed him, he wouldn't be too harsh on him. So, you have a way to leave this place? Partridge Lee's expression gradually calmed down as he looked at Primitive Emperor without much vigilance. It wasn't that his intelligence was lowered by Partridge Lee. It was just that, who could stand this trap after trap? Ling Zhao's injuries are rather severe. Right now, in the western frontier, Cold Moon Immortal Palace is the safest place for him. I chased him all the way to the foot of Mount Han. He only needs a little more time to enter the Immortal Mountain. Primitive Emperor's mouth curved into a sinister smile as his eyes were filled with killing intent. Now, Cold Moon Immortal Palace Master has joined forces with the Sky Demon to try and take the Immortal World's fortune. She didn't hesitate to activate the Sect Protecting Array to prevent any unforeseen events. But I'm afraid she would never have imagined that Milord and I would be carried back to the mountain by Ling Xiao in a spirit treasure. As long as we use our strength to break it, this spirit treasure would break at any time. You mean, you deliberately allowed Ling Xiao to absorb you into this treasure? Partridge Gully glanced at the Origin Emperor in surprise. He had never expected that the Dayuan Emperor Lord's hatred for evil would be so deep. He actually dared to take the risk and enter the Immortal Mountain in such a manner. Was he not afraid of being trapped by Ling Xiao and the treasure, never to see the light of day again? My lord, you may not know this, but Princess Yuan Yao of the Yuan dynasty, is still in the Immortal World. If I can't enter the Cold Moon Celestial Palace, I'm afraid she will. So that's how it is. Partridge Gully's expression turned solemn, but his respect for the Primitive Emperor grew in his heart. This was the responsibility of a father. Even though he knew that the Immortal Palace was full of demons, he was still willing to take the risk to go up the mountain to slay the demons and save his daughter. Don't worry, as long as I can walk out of this pagoda, this divine envoy will join forces with you to exterminate this evil spirit. Thank you, Oracle. The Primitive Emperor took a deep breath and bowed deeply towards Partridge Gully. Behind him, the four great god emperors of the Yuan bowed as well. The entire Glaze ancient pagoda suddenly fell in his silence. Partridge Gully lowered his head to look at his new body, frowning slightly as if he was in deep thought. In just a few months, his life had gone through so many twists and turns. From the high and mighty divine envoy of the sacred sect to the sky demon's prisoner. But at the same time, apart from hatred towards Ling Xiao, there was also a faint trace of fear. Given the strength of the reincarnated sky demon and the trump cards in his hands, he had probably been hiding in the Shengzhou for quite some time. But even so, let alone the divine master, even the entire sacred sect did not notice any clues. That Milord had reported to the divine master that there was a very interesting young man in the eastern border named Ling Xiao. But it was only because of his extraordinary talent and arrogance. It was precisely because of this arrogance that everyone's thoughts were unknowingly numbed. After all, no one would have thought that a sky demon that was not tolerated by the world dared to be famous in the Shengzhou. Was this not courting death? Suddenly, Partridge Gully felt a chill in his heart. Given this young man's temperament, this trip would not be too smooth. Cold Moon Celestial Mountain, at the foot of the mountain. At this moment, the entire Celestial Mountain was enveloped by a large array. Vast spiritual power surged through heaven and earth, forming an array in midair. It was like a layer of golden clouds, intimidating all evil in the world. Divine light soared into the sky, and runes evolved into heaven and earth, embellishing the golden array, revealing its mysteries. This ancient array was left behind by Cold Moon's ancestor, Yi Luoyin, and given the latter's research on arrays, it would be difficult for Partridge Gully and the Primitive Emperor to break it. F***CK Run Yueying had already sent a message to the sacred sect. If these two pieces of trash delayed for too long, wouldn't Ling Zhao's plan be ruined? Moreover, he was instinctively wary of Partridge Gully, an 8th-grade divine emperor and a divine envoy of the sacred sect, who knew if he had other means to contact the sacred sect, Only by trapping him in the tower, suppressing his divine soul, and letting the primitive emperor and others monitor him, would it be foolproof. I said, "Divine envoy, don't cry. I'll bring you out. I'll spit out blood and bring you out. I'll break this array and bring you out." Uft. Ling Xiao spat out a mouthful of blood, then looked at his starry robe and frowned slightly. Whoosh. Then, with a thought, the first disciple of Cold Moon's celestial palace, Lu Yun, who was refining pills in the realm, appeared in front of him with a dazed expression and dark circles around his eyes. Plop! "Greetings, Lord. Get up, I'll borrow some of your blood." Ling Xiao smiled faintly, but Lu Yun felt chills all over his body, and his head was lacking in oxygen. He almost fainted on the spot. Finally, this day has finally come. Since the first month, I haven't reached my alchemy target. For 3 months, my performance has been at the bottom of the entire elixir hall. Lord is finally going to kill me as a warning to others. However, this is Cold Moon, Celestial Mountain. Lord, you're so considerate. Before you die, you let my soul return to my homeland. All right, you can go back. Ling Xiao stabbed 2 fingers into Lu Yun's chest and spat out a mouthful of blood. Then, with a wave of his hand, he sent the dazed first disciple of Cold Palace back. In the realm, Lu Yun lowered his head in a daze and looked at the wound on his chest. He didn't react for a long time. Then, Han Zhan snorted from afar. "Hurry up and refine pills." Yes, yes. King, a medicine." Lu Yun looked up at the sky and knelt on the ground with a plop. Finally, tears fell from the corners of his eyes. "What's wrong with bleeding a little? I eat so many spirit pills and immortal ingredients every day, so I'm full of vigor. Lord didn't kill me, but let me bleed a little. This is a spur to me. Thank you, Lord, for your kindness." From today onwards, Yun will definitely risk his life to refine pills and work hard to improve his performance. Look, there's a red-clothed figure over there. At the foot of the immortal mountain, several disciples guarding the mountain saw a youth slowly walking out of the ancient forest. Their eyes narrowed fiercely. F***CK. Why does this person look so familiar? Red-clothed figure? Hey, I'm Lord Ling Xiao. It's Lord Ling Xiao. What? Did Lord disguise himself? Quickly inform the palace lord that Lord Ling Xiao is back. Chapter 594. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. At the peak of Cold Moon Mountain, the sound of wind breaking could be heard. Then, Ren Yueying and the other elders turned into rainbows and descended from the sky, standing in front of the mountain gate. However, when they saw the youth standing in front of the forest with a dispirited aura, the expressions on everyone's faces instantly turned sluggish. It's Lord Ling Xiao. Damn it, what are you all standing there for? Quick, open the array and let the young master in. Quick, Ren Yueying shouted angrily. The spiritual light around her suddenly shot up into the sky and gathered in the ancient array above her head, turning into moonlight. In front of Ling Xiao, a crack appeared in the ancient array, and he immediately stepped into it. A strong smell of blood assaulted their senses. At this moment, everyone realized that the young master was not in disguise. His white clothes were dyed red by blood. Suddenly, the entire Cold Moon, Celestial Mountain fell into a deathly silence. A wisp of heartfelt reverence arose in the hearts of everyone as they gazed at the young man in blood-red clothes, who had a pale complexion and firm eyes. Looking at the young master's appearance, he must have gone through a fierce battle, fighting a bloody battle. This phrase was so noble and great. Some of the prides of the immortal palaces had tears in their eyes. Originally, in their hearts, Ling Xiao was an outstanding, righteous, and handsome immortal, cold and arrogant, high up in the sky, overlooking the mortal world. But now, there seemed to be a trace of smoke and fire on his body. That was the protection of all living beings. Don't ask. Asking is the young master's righteousness. Young master, you are. Ren Yueying also had a trace of respect in her eyes. With Ling Xiao's strength, he could be said to be invincible among his peers. But he was only a 17-year-old young man. If he encountered a god king or a god emperor, he would definitely be defeated. But even so, he resolutely walked out of the ancient array and headed to the chaotic land to find the whereabouts of the divine envoys. Especially that day, the white-robed figure on the ancient mountain path left an indelible obsession in Run Yueying's heart. Palace Lord, did the Holy Church send back any news? Ling Xiao shook his head and smiled, looking calm. Even though he was severely injured, it did not diminish his peerless demeanor. Young Master's life may be full of twists and turns, but the word handsome will always be there. No. Ren Yuing shook her head sadly. In the end, she was going to bear everything. No. And Lord Ling Xiao. Young Master, have you found any traces of my lord? No, but Ling Xiao took a deep breath, and his body staggered again. Beside him, a female genius immediately cried out in surprise and clustered around him, supporting his arm. Even if the smell of blood was unpleasant, it was still a great honor for them to be able to get closer to young Master. I found Xia Feng and the others. What? Where is Xia Feng? Killing intent flashed in Run Yueying's eyes. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that today's disaster was caused by Xia Feng. After all, according to Lord Ling Xiao, the origin of that demon was not simple. He had awakened his strength and released the great demon, causing her cold moon immortal palace to fall into such a predicament. If he didn't kill him, it would be hard to quell the fire in Run Yueying's heart. He met up with the primitive emperor, and I happened to meet him. Ling Xiao sighed, but he was pondering in his heart. Logically speaking, the saint sect should not be so calm with the disappearance of the divine emissary. But the more it was so, the more Ling Xiao felt uneasy. Could it be because Partridge Li's divine soul was not destroyed, and the saint sect noticed some clues? It seemed that he had to hurry up and urge the fourth divine emissary to die. What? Hearing this, the elders and disciples of the celestial palace were shocked again. No wonder young Master would end up in such a miserable state. It turned out that he encountered Xia Feng and the primitive emperor. Young Master, you are indeed the #1 genius of the western border. As a divine general, you escaped from the hands of a divine emperor. Who in the entire Xingzhou could achieve such a feat? Suddenly, young Master's whereabouts were discovered by the demon. Fortunately, young Master could escape back to the celestial palace. Ren Yueying breathed a sigh of relief. No matter what, as long as young Master was not dead, there was still hope for the cold moon celestial palace. Unknowingly, Ling Xiao seemed to have become the spiritual belief of the cold palace. It was as if as long as he was there, everyone was filled with strength. No, I capture them as well. However, just as everyone was secretly lamenting in their hearts, Ling Xiao's next sentence instantly made the entire celestial mountain inexplicably feel a chill. What? What did young Master say? Everyone looked at each other, as if they did not hear Ling Xiao's words clearly. Young Master said, he captured them? Them. Young Master, you mean? Run Yueying opened her mouth wide, and there was a hint of shock between her eyebrows. I have a treasure that can imprison demons and have an extremely strong suppressive effect on them. So, I risked my life and captured all of them. Young Master, righteousness. Scream for me, shout for me, shake it up for me. Everyone's movements must be uniform. Originally, on this day, everyone in the cold palace was prepared to die in their hearts. After all, the primitive emperor was the emperor of the celestial palace, and now he had joined forces with true demon Xia Feng and the experts of the Sea Clan to slaughter the western border. Even with the strength of the 8th stage of the great emperor realm, the divine emissary's whereabouts were unknown, and he was most likely dead. What could they use to fight against the demons? However, never in their wildest dreams would they have thought that young Master Ling Xiao would be able to resolve this calamity so easily. Although young Master was seriously injured, he suppressed all the demons. What kind of great achievement was this? At this time, many elders and disciples of the Celestial Palace had already regarded Ling Xiao as an immortal god. If he was not an immortal god, how could he be so merciful and have such means. Young master, I desperately want to kneel down and kowtow to you. Young, young master, you mean you sealed Xiaofeng, the primitive emperor, and the others? Rin Yueying swallowed hard, and her expression was already completely dull. Was it that simple? Why was she suddenly unable to accept it? I should not call him Xiaofeng now. I heard that he was conspiring with the primitive emperor to impersonate the divine emissary, trying to deceive the entire western border and deceive the saint sect. Unfortunately, I saw through it. Ling Xiao snorted coldly and gently waved his hand. A black ancient tower instantly appeared in the void. On it, the divine might was vast, and the spiritual ripples were fluctuating. There was actually a kind of power that could suppress heaven and earth. In the sky, a strange phenomenon began to appear. The sun and the moon sank, and the universe evolved into the ancient times. The decadent Tao sound was faintly discernible and melodious, and when it landed in people's ears, it was shocking. The origin of the Glaze ancient tower was originally mysterious, and it had long surpassed the settings of this world. Back then, the model of Yifan was also extremely powerful. Therefore, when this ancient tower appeared in the sky, the doubts in people's hearts instantly dissipated. A divine treasure. This was a treasure that transcended the heavens. No wonder young master could suppress the God Emperor with this treasure. This was the so-called trump card that people often talked about, right? Good. The cold moon celestial palace will celebrate for 7 days. Quickly, set up a banquet to welcome young master. Rin Yueying exclaimed in admiration repeatedly. However, right after she said those words, she saw that the mystical ancient pagoda suddenly began to shine with demonic light. What the F*** CK? Chapter 595. In the Glaze ancient pagoda, the primitive emperor and the others surged with spiritual light and blasted toward the void above their heads. Suddenly, the entire ancient pagoda violently tumbled, as if it couldn't withstand the might of the emperors. A space crack gradually appeared in the sky. A dazzling light sprinkled from it and shone on Partridge Lee's face, causing his body to tremble for no reason. This is the temperature. This is the aura. This is the taste of freedom. Suddenly, Partridge Lee's eyes flashed with a hint of ferocity. Today, when I leave the pagoda, it will be the time for the dragon to return to the deep sea. From now on, I'm the master of heaven and earth. Wind and clouds gather and disperse at my command. Ling Xiao, Rin Yueying, I will make sure you die without a burial place. My lord, stop trembling. If you delay any longer, you won't be able to get out. The primitive emperor's eyes flashed with a wisp of soul light, and the corner of his mouth raised into a sneer. The game has been set, and everyone has entered the trap. Next, it was time for the game. However, today, whether it was the black taking the white or the white taking the black, it had nothing to do with Ling Xiao, the chess player, because from the beginning to the end, this game was just his own entertainment. All living beings die, only I live. Let's go. Partridge Lee gritted his teeth and turned into a stream of light, rushing out of the pagoda. A sneer appeared on the primitive emperor's face. My lord, it seems that you really yearn for freedom. On the immortal mountain, Ren Yueying and the rest of the Han Palace powerhouses stared at the violently trembling ancient pagoda, and the next moment, their eyes suddenly narrowed. Endless demonic chi began to surge, and in a short moment, it turned into a dark cloud, shrouding the entire mountain peak. F***CK? What's going on? Everyone looked at Ling Xiao, only to see that at this time, the latter's eyes also had a touch of bitterness and despair, and there was even a trace of blood at the corner of his mouth. Not good. The young master is afraid that he can't hold on. Everyone, the demons are breaking out of the pagoda. I'm afraid I can't suppress them. Prepare to fight to the death. Ling Xiao roared in despair, and the spiritual light around him shone brightly, and the originally withered aura seemed to be rejuvenated. What? Ren Yueying's expression, and a chill spread in her heart. What happened to the banquet? Why does it feel like I'm going to be? Boom! In the end, the glazed ancient pagoda turned into a stream of light and disappeared into Ling Zhao's soul sea. Suddenly, several demonic figures appeared in the sky and gradually revealed their true forms. Buzz! Spiritual light whistled around the elders of the celestial palace, evolving into Saint Might. At this point, they seemed to have no other choice. Although Lord Ling Zhao's actions seemed to have helped the demons a great deal. But this wasn't young master's fault. In everyone's eyes, the fact that he risked his life to seal the great demon was already a righteous act. Now that his aura was weak and he had been taken advantage of by the demon, what else could he say? If they continued to blame them, it would only prove that they were cowards. Ha ha! We're finally out. Partridge Gully stood in the void with an excited expression. In the next moment, his expression froze. Beside him, Yuan Emperor and the others stood with their hands behind their backs. They were surrounded by a deathly aura that formed sea. It was as if there were tens of thousands of ghosts howling in unison, eerie and evil. Moreover, most importantly, Partridge Gully seemed to have discovered that there were two more people behind Yuan Emperor. One of them was a terrifying demonic figure that was several feet tall. He was covered in black armor, and his face was majestic and ferocious. However, there seemed to be no vitality on his body. Only that pair of scarlet eyes flickered with soul light. Monstrous demonic aura whistled around his body. Numerous bizarre demonic patterns manifested in the air, transforming into boundless phenomena. He just stood there, but he gave people a feeling of indestructible heaven and earth. The other person was covered in a black robe. He had a slender figure, but the demonic aura emitted from his body could be described as terrifying. There was a faint, salty aura. Great demon, great demon. These were two great demons. At this time, everyone on the cold moon celestial mountain looked at the two terrifying demonic figures and swallowed their saliva. In the blink of an eye, Ren Yueing understood. This was the ancient demon that was released by Xia Feng from the immortal world that young master mentioned. The one beside him should be the fierce demon that caused trouble in the western border. No, it should be a sea demon. That moist and salty smell was too obvious. I know, this was the smell of the sea. These two people were, of course, Xiong Huan and Layered Shadow that Ling Xiao had arranged in the glazed ancient pagoda. Ren Yueing was, after all, fighting on her home ground. With the primitive emperor and Partridge Gully's current strength, they might not be able to kill them all. So, Lord Divine Envoy, I will help you. Hiss! Partridge Gully's soul light instantly surged. He frowned as he looked at the calm, primitive emperor and the others. At first, he thought that these two demons were Ling Zhao's accomplices. But something was not right. Why did the primitive emperor and the others not seem to be surprised at all? 5 people went in and 7 came out. He was not surprised or confused. Xiaofeng, Yuan Gexing, you actually joined hands with the sea race and slaughtered my western border. Today, even if I die, I will use the power of the immortal palace to kill you all. Just as Partridge Gully was muttering to himself, Ren Yueing suddenly shouted. The entire cold moon immortal mountain suddenly erupted with countless tyrannical auras. All the elders and disciples of the cold palace held their spirit treasures and waited solemnly, as if they were ready to fight the demons. Join hand with the sea race. Thump. Partridge Gully's mouth slightly opened as he turned to look at the primitive emperor and the 2 demons, especially the gloomy aura that swept over their bodies. It was filled with a heart-palpitating evil intent. No matter how he looked at it, it seemed like he was on the same side as the demons. On the contrary, Ren Yueing, Ling Xiao, and the others were covered in golden light, their righteous aura soaring to the sky. It seemed like they were the righteous side. On the mountain peak, there were western border citizens and cultivators crowded in front of the palace, looking down the mountain. At this moment, their faces revealed a trace of resentment. In just a day, hundreds of thousands of vagrant cultivators had gathered on the immortal mountain. In their hearts, the cold palace's Ren Yueing and the blood-soaked Lord Ling Xiao were their last hope. Ren Yueing, Don't talk nonsense. I am the fourth divine envoy of the sacred sect, Partridge Gully. You colluded with the true demon and fooled the world. If I don't kill you today, it will be difficult to resolve the hatred in my heart. To be honest, Partridge Gully's heart was also somewhat hesitant. He felt that the primitive emperor and the others did not seem to be good people. But no matter what kind of demons they were, compared to the sky demon Ling Xiao, they were nothing to be afraid of. After all, these two forces were like fire and water. Let them fight to the death. Today, as long as he killed Ling Xiao, it would be a great merit. Fourth divine envoy? Ren Yueying sneered and turned to look at Ling Xiao. Her eyes were filled with ridicule. You don't say. Your voice is quite good. If not for the young master seeing through your scheme, if he gave you a divine order, I might have really believed it. You are about to die and still dare to talk nonsense. If you are the fourth divine envoy, I will stand upside down and eat shit. All elders of the immortal palace, attack together with me. In the end, Ren Yueying did not speak any more nonsense and waved her lily-white hand. A spiritual light palm print instantly condensed into heaven and earth and fell on Partridge Gully's head. Chapter 596. Ren Yueying, you're courting death. Partridge Gully narrowed his eyes and sneered in his heart. Why are you in such a hurry? Ren Yueying, are you afraid that I'll expose your lies and make you intolerable to the world? Good. Ren Yueying, you betrayed our holy sect. Today I, as the fourth divine envoy, sentence your cold moon celestial palace to be exterminated. Partridge Gully roared and pressed his palm down. Monstrous golden light began to bloom, but it was mixed with a trace of demonic intent. It was densely covered with Tao runes, revealing supreme majesty. However, at this moment, curses were heard from the forest. Bah, shameless. You're obviously a demon, but you dare to impersonate a divine envoy. If the holy sect has a divine envoy like you, it doesn't matter if we don't believe it in the future. Yes, true demon Xiaofeng is impersonating a divine envoy. Palace Master, please kill this demon for the world. Kill him. Partridge Gully's body trembled, and blood almost spurted out from his throat. The world is stupid. The world is stupid. Boom. The two spiritual palms collided in the void, and countless rays of light bloomed in the world. Countless cracks appeared on the mountain under Ren Yueying's feet, and her figure was pushed back several meters before she could stabilize herself. What a terrifying battle strength! The expressions of the cold palace elders changed, but there was not much fear in their eyes. After all, this was the cold moon celestial mountain, and the array above their heads could contend against an 8th stage divine emperor. Although these demons are top-notch experts, the immortal palace has a lot of people. What are you waiting for? Kill! Ren Yueying gritted her teeth and shouted softly. Beside her, great elder Tan Jingshui rushed out and pounced on primitive emperor. My lord and I will work together to deal with Ren Yueying and Tan Jingshui. The rest of you, quickly kill the cold palace elders. Primitive emperor looked at Ling Xiao deeply and said, As for that Ling Xiao, Humph, the sea race friend, how about I leave him to you? No problem. Our sea emperor has instructed us to listen to primitive emperor's orders in the western border. Folded Shadow smiled and spread out his demonic aura, which turned into waves and swept toward Ling Xiao. Primitive emperor. What's going on? Who is that person from the sea race? Partridge Gully turned his head and looked at primitive emperor with a puzzled expression. The latter only shook his head and smiled. Sir, don't worry. It's just a friend I invited to help me kill Ren Yueying. Then, Partridge Gully's eyes narrowed slightly as he looked at Xiong Huan with a hint of fear. To be honest, whether it was the primitive emperor or the sea demon, he didn't really put them in his eyes. Only this fiendish demon who hadn't said a word from beginning to end made him feel a chill all over his body. The devilish will on his body seemed to be able to split the heavens and earth apart and create a profound universe. This demon's origin was probably not simple. This is a friend of a friend from the sea race. He is also here to help. My lord, if you hesitate any longer, I'm afraid we'll all be buried here today. The primitive emperor said indifferently. He turned into a rainbow light and went straight for Tan Jingshui. In the end, Partridge Gully didn't think too much about it. He took a deep breath, and spiritual wheels began to flicker around his body. No matter what, the news of the western border would soon reach the Divine Lord's ears. At that time, everything would be decided by the Divine Master. Rin Yuing, we haven't seen each other for many years. Let this divine envoy see how much progress you have made. Partridge Gully stretched out his palm, and the spiritual energy of heaven and earth began to roar around his body. In an instant, 2 dazzling rings appeared in the sky like the scorching sun. Vast divine power surged out, and the runes on it overflowed. It was indescribably magical and terrifying. Then, Partridge Gully's palm pressed down, and 2 bright suns fell from the sky toward Ren Yuying's head. The entire space collapsed in an instant, and the sound of the great Tao resounded in everyone's ears. Ren Yuying frowned slightly, and the divine clouds surged around her. A golden cauldron condensed out of thin air, emitting an indestructible aura, and fiercely collided with the spiritual wheels. Clang! The sound of a huge bell crashing into each other resounded loudly. The spiritual waves, visible to the naked eye, swept across the entire immortal mountain. Countless disciples of the cold palace instantly vomited blood and flew backward. Even on the mountain peak, there were commoners bleeding from their 7 orifices and fell to the ground dead. What a ruthless demon! He even killed unarmed commoners. Everyone be careful. Ling Xiao stepped out and stood on the mountain path. The spiritual light around his body lit up, blocking the endless spiritual waves. At this time, his face was getting paler and paler, especially his blood-stained white robe, which added a bit of poignant beauty. Under the impact of the spiritual waves, Ling Xiao's figure kept retreating. Every time he retreated, he would spit out a mouthful of blood. The entire mountain path was gradually dyed red with blood. At this time, the firm and upright figure was like an obsession, deeply engraved in the hearts of everyone. Lord Ling Xiao. Seeing this scene, countless people had tears in their eyes, and their hearts were surging. This is the backbone of our western border. What holy sect? What divine envoy? Where were you when the demon appeared? Who can stop the demon's advance? Only I, Lord Ling Xiao. Pucci. This time, Partridge Gully, who was far away in the sky, finally could not suppress the resentment in his heart, and a trace of blood flowed out of the corner of his mouth. Too sullen. This feeling is too sullen. He was the divine envoy of the holy sect, the embodiment of justice, but now he was framed by the true demon and was reviled by the world. But he, the reincarnation of the sky demon, pretended to be noble and righteous, and he was willing to sacrifice himself for justice. Shameless. Despicable. He's not human. Oh, he's not human in the first place. Damn. Boom. A huge wave swept across the sky, emitting an endless bloody aura. The overlapping figure appeared above Ling Xiao's head, and a wave was formed under the Jade Hand seal. Ling Xiao's eyes narrowed slightly, and he unsheathed the evil sea sword in his hand and slashed down. The sword intent filled the sky, and a soft sound spread like the wind. It became loud and clear until it was ear-piercing. Clang! The sword intent was like a dragon, piercing the clouds and shattering the sky, and fell toward the wave. Then, everyone was dumbfounded as they watched the monstrous wave suddenly split into 2, turning in a spiritual light that fell from the sky. Hiss! On the mountain peak, everyone sucked in a cold breath. Is this the young master's true strength? There's nothing to say. Young master. Awesome. Boom. Boom. In the sky, the sound of spiritual power colliding could be heard. Spirit treasures flashing with multicolored light floated in the sky and smashed toward Partridge Gully. The sky shattered, and the immortal mountain trembled. Even with the strength of this divine envoy, he was still a little flustered at this time. unable to cope with the situation. There was no other way. There were dozens of elders of the Cold Palace, and he was facing them alone. Why aren't you attacking? Partridge Gully turned his head and looked at the god emperors of the Yuan dynasty and shouted coldly. At this point, he could not care about anything else. If he really died here today, then the truth would definitely be covered up. He could not die. Boom! Xiong Huan took a step forward, and a demonic shadow appeared behind him, standing tall in the sky. Endless demonic light erupted like a volcano, and in an instant, the sky suddenly darkened. Chapter 597. When did such a great demon appear in the Shengzhou? Looking at the tall demonic figure that appeared in front of the elders, Partridge Gully's eyes narrowed. He could feel that the demonic intent on the demonic body was monstrous. As he breathed, the space trembled faintly. But why didn't the sacred sect know about such a powerful demon? Partridge Gully inexplicably felt that the Shengzhou was about to descend into chaos. Above the void, spiritual light spread for thousands of miles, destroying the demonic splendor. However, with Xiong Huan's strength, ordinary god emperors were no match for him. In front of him, two elders of the Celestial Palace were struggling. But with their strength, even after using all their trump cards, they couldn't break through the demon's defense. The demonic bear battle physique was known for its defense. Even if Xiong Huan's spiritual power was gone, his demonic intent and physical body alone were not something these ants could contend against. For someone who stood high above the 9 heavens to fall in a single night, it was extraordinary. With the addition of Xiong Huan, the Cold Moon Palace people, who had the upper hand, were soon sent flying while vomiting blood and screaming. Elders, fight to the death. Seeing this scene, Ren Ying's eyes were filled with rage as she roared towards the sky. Dao runes began to appear on her jade-like hand, and the golden cauldron instantly expanded to 100 feet in size, suppressing Partridge Gully. At the same time, a Dao artifact appeared in Tan Jingshui's hand. It was a red silk that turned into an immortal mist and wrapped around Yuan Emperor. The power of the all-out attack of more than 10 god emperors was imaginable. Above the cold moon celestial mountain, spatial turbulence was rampant, and pieces of ice crystals were shattered. Within 100 miles, there was no spiritual energy, and the forest collapsed. It was as if doomsday had arrived. The sacred sect had ruled the Shengzhou for thousands of years. Although the western border was chaotic all year round, such a large-scale battle had never happened. However, the Dao artifacts kept colliding, and just the aftershocks were enough to kill countless living beings. This was destined to be an endless battle between the righteous and demonic sides. However, under Ling Zhao's arrangements, the original righteous and demonic sides had been completely reversed. Time passed slowly. Above the celestial mountain, blood qi filled the air and demonic light whistled. Although Cold Moon Immortal Palace had many people, Partridge Gully, Primitive Emperor, and Xiong Huan all had the terrifying battle strength of a 7th-stage god emperor. Furthermore, as the ghostly radiance outside the Primitive Emperor's body whistled, the fallen elders of the Cold Palace slowly got up from the ground, turned around, and rushed towards their fellow disciples. Evil ghost arts, one could see how savage it was. Puchi. In Xiong Huan's hands, the two elders of the Cold Palace were unable to withstand the demonic might that was like a sea and were crushed into minced meat. Xiaofeng, even if I have to risk the destruction of the Immortal Palace, I will kill you. Ren Yueying gritted her teeth, her eyes flashing with determination. Then, she took a step forward, and her figure instantly appeared under the void array. At this moment, spiritual light rippled from her body and turned into an ancient crescent moon seal that entered the formation. In the next moment, there seemed to be a divine shadow descending from the formation, overlooking the world. An indescribable chill rose from the bottom of everyone's heart. The patterns of the great Tao transformed into moonlight pouring down from the sky. Layer upon layer, they interweaved into a seal. Then, the divine shadow stretched out his hand, grabbed the spiritual seal and softly chanted an incantation. Above the firmament, silver light shone brightly. Vaguely, a crescent moon appeared in the middle of the formation, covering the horizon. Xiafeng, today I will destroy you on behalf of the Cold Moon Palace. Outside Run Yueying's body, spiritual light rushed into the sky and entered the ancient formation. This formation was left behind by the ancestor of the Cold Moon Palace. Outside, it could protect the immortal mountain, and inside, it could suppress and kill evil spirits. However, to activate the formation, one must use an extremely large amount of spiritual energy as a guide. If it was in the past, Ren Yueying would not dare to put all her eggs in one basket. But now, looking at the elders of the immortal palace who were cruelly killed by Xiong Huan, the primitive emperor, and the others, Ren Yueying had no way out. If she was defeated today, she would lose her life and reputation. Even if she had to gamble with her spiritual energy, she had to try her best. Vast divine might began to surge, and an unparalleled momentum that could suppress and kill all living things descended from the sky. On the spiritual moon, divine runes appeared, and there seemed to be an immortal descending from the moon. Carrying the momentum of destroying eternity, it pressed down on Partridge Lee's head. "Oomph! Ren Yueying, do you think you can kill me?" Partridge Lee shouted coldly, and a torrential momentum accumulated on his body. A golden blazing sun appeared in the sky, illuminating the firmament and surging with holy intent. "Go!" The spiritual moon and the golden sun rose and fell, crushing the entire immortal mountain into pieces. The void within thousands of miles cracked, as if it could not withstand such divine might. Even Ling, Xiao, and the others hurriedly circulated their spiritual energy to protect their bodies and rushed into the distant sky. Boom! An indescribable power rippled out like the end of an era. Wherever the spiritual might passed, all living things perished and no vitality remained. The glaring light illuminated the entire world like it was scorching white. The spiritual formation that originally enveloped the immortal mountain finally shattered at this moment. Crack! Hearing the sound, the eyes of all the disciples of the cold palace suddenly narrowed. However, the radiance of the blazing sun and the spiritual moon was too bright, and they could not see the scene inside clearly. Only Ling Xiao stood on the mountain peak with his hands behind his back, and his eyes remained calm. Sure enough, even if her physical body was shattered and her cultivation level fell, the strength of the sacred sect's divine envoy was still extremely terrifying. If Ren Yueying did not rely on this ancient formation, she would have definitely died under this attack. Even so, she was not far from death at this moment. Puffed. Suddenly, the sound of someone vomiting blood came from above the void. Only then did everyone see a white-robed figure fall from the sky. His aura was weak, and he only had one last breath of life left. Under the joint attack of Xiong Huan and the primitive emperor, the Cold Palace's great elder's physical body was shattered, and his divine soul was destroyed. Oomph. Ren Yueying, do you really think that with just you and an immature, true demon, you can contend against me? I am still invincible in the western border. Wait until I capture your divine soul and see how I torture you. Just as Partridge Lee's voice rang out, a black shadow swept over from the void and grabbed the Cold Moon Palace Master in his hand. Stop! Partridge Lee's eyes narrowed. Just now, he had enough time to kill Ren Yueying. The reason why he did not kill her was that he wanted to capture her and search her soul to find out how she had joined the Sky Demon. However, before he could stop him, the demonic shadow clenched his fist and crushed Ren Yueying instantly. What a joke. How could Ling Xiao not think of something that he could think of? The experts of the sacred sect must be on the way, so he would not leave any threat behind. Today, no one on this immortal mountain could survive. You, Partridge Lee's face darkened, and his eyes flashed with killing intent. Damn it, this evil demon had actually ruined his grand plan. Are you teaching me how to do things? Xiong Huan turned around and looked at Partridge Lee coldly. The latter only felt a chill go straight to the top of his head, and a trace of uneasiness flashed in his eyes. Originally, he was quite wary of this great devil. That seal just now had exhausted all of his spiritual energy. If this great demon attacked him, he would not be able to defeat him. Bear with it. Be steady. Wait a minute. Boom. However, since Partridge Li was avoiding the battle, Ling Xiao would not give him a chance. Xiong Huan stepped forward, and momentum around him rose steadily. Every step he took was like a loud thunder that shook people's hearts. You were still hiding your strength. At this moment, Partridge Li's heart trembled. Chapter 598. Boom, boom. The sky demon intent overflowed from Xiong Huan's body. The demonic aura carried a domineering aura that could destroy heaven and earth. With a single step, the void shattered. Xiong Huan's figure finally appeared in front of Partridge Li. I didn't teach you to do anything. I just wanted to spare her life. Partridge Li no longer had the majesty of a divine envoy. With this great demon strength, he might not be able to suppress Xiong Huan even at his peak. Today, Xiong Huan couldn't die. Otherwise, the saint would fall into a passive position. Damn it, he knew that these demons did whatever they wanted and didn't need a reason to kill. It was completely based on their mood. Why did he have to do something unnecessary and provoke them for no reason? For the first time in his life, Partridge Li was in awe of demons. Die, however. Xiong Huan killed him under Ling Xiao's orders. Behind him, 100-meter-tall, demonic figure appeared. There seemed to be a demonic roar that shook the heavens and the earth, as if a peerless monster was about to break out of the ground. Then, under the dumbfounded gazes of all the Shijiang people, Xiong Huan punched out. The void instantly distorted and collapsed. The demonic aura was vast and mighty, as if there were thousands of demons roaring in the world. Many disciples with weaker cultivations only felt the aura around their bodies tremble and boil. They were actually shaken to death by the might of this punch, bleeding from their 7 apertures. No, Partridge Li's eyes were filled with despair. Now that he had seized Xia Feng's body, the strength of this body wasn't enough to support him to use his strongest trump card. Moreover, Xiong Huan's timing was perfect. He had just used up all of his spiritual energy to fight Ren Yueying and couldn't recover in a short period of time. Facing this heaven-shattering punch, Partridge Li's eyes were filled with resentment and anger. Yuan Emperor, save me. My lord, you're already invincible. Why do you need others to save you? Yuan Emperor stood with his hands behind his back with a mocking expression. The resentment on Partridge Li's face was completely frozen before it dissipated. At this moment, he seemed to see a faint smile on the lips of the youth on the mountain peak. Suddenly, Partridge Li's body trembled uncontrollably as if he was electrocuted. Conspiracy. Even though he had his doubts before, Partridge Gully still didn't think that Ling Xiao had the strength to kill him. He also did not think that there was anyone in the western border who could threaten him other than the incarnation of Lord Taixian. However, he never expected that Xiong Huan had actually concealed his strength. Moreover, he chose to attack him at such an opportune moment. In an instant, Partridge Li understood many things. Why did he coincidentally possess a young devil's body? Why would Yuan Emperor and the others appear in the ancient pagoda at the right time? And why would there be 2 more devils on the frigid moon celestial mountain? This was a conspiracy. This was a conspiracy. Of course, until now, Partridge Gully would never have imagined that a mere 17-year-old youth would be able to command several god emperors. What was even more unexpected was that he would be so scheming. Step by step, it was as if he had fallen into the trap that Ling Xiao had prepared for him a long time ago. In that case, that Ren Yueying might really not know that Ling Xiao was a devil. Xia Feng. This name sounded familiar. Wait, was he the prince of the Xia dynasty, the rumored true devil youth? At this moment, even with Partridge Li's temperament, he felt an inexplicable chill. Ling Xiao had actually planned this for such a long time. It could be said to be flawless, Everyone who appeared had their fates firmly controlled by him, playing the role he wanted them to play. What did this have to do with lowering one's intelligence? Like a net, one was powerless to struggle. The more one struggled, the tighter it would become. It turned out that long before the Saint sect had discovered the reincarnation of the Sky Demon, he had already deliberately set up his chess pieces to destroy the Saint sect's strength. However, in this case, Partridge Lee's eyes suddenly flashed with a trace of panic. If he died, no one in the entire western border would know Ling Zhao's true identity. In fact, looking at the admiration in the eyes of the people of the western border for Ling Zhao, Partridge Lee felt a deep sense of powerlessness, toying with the people in the palm of his hand. But the people respected him like an immortal. What a terrifying temperament. What a terrifying strategy. The Saint sect was in danger. No, I can't die. Soul light suddenly rippled around Partridge Lee, turning into a divine rainbow that enveloped his entire body. At this critical moment, the Saint sect's divine envoy finally remembered his mission. He could die, but he must let the Divine Master know that the Sky Demon had returned. The endless void began to ripple, and the light in front of Partridge Lee was completely distorted. He took the initiative to burn his divine soul, forming a seal with his 8th grade Emperor's soul, and attacked Xionghuan. The power of this seal was extremely terrifying. The blue sky was densely covered with cracks. However, at this time, Xionghuan's eyes did not waver. With a force that could crush the heavens, he fiercely punched the soul seal. Clang! Partridge Lee screamed, and half of his body instantly shattered. Blood sprinkled from the sky, and there was a trace of despair in his eyes. However, just as his divine soul left his body and was about to escape, the void in front of him suddenly trembled. A young man's figure emerged and stood in front of him. The gentle smile at the corner of his mouth was clearly mixed with supreme demonic intent. There were only a few people in the Shangzhou land who were proficient in divine soul attacks. This was the reason why Partridge Lee wanted to possess a body. Now that he had burned his divine soul, he was already extremely weak. He wanted to escape, but he saw that the young man's eyes suddenly lit up with bright red light. No! An irresistible devouring force swept over, enveloping Partridge Lee's divine soul and crushing it. At the same time, a jumbled memory suddenly appeared in Ling Zhao's soul sea. He just calmly swung his sword, and Xia Feng's body was decapitated. Good. Young master is mighty. The entire cold moon, celestial mountain, was instantly filled with thunderous applause. All the western border cultivators and citizens looked at the figure that fell from the sky with joy and excitement. Although the timing of Ling Zhao's killing was more or less a little sinister and despicable. But could this be called despicable? Young master took advantage of the internal strife between the two demons to kill them. This was called heroic and wise. Moreover, would being merciful to demons have a good ending? Look at Princess Yao Yao. Wasn't this painful enough? Since there was an 80% chance that none of them would survive today, it was worth it to kill a demon. Die. In the sky, Xionghuan's expression was calm as he threw a seemingly fierce punch. Ling Xiao cooperated and flew back. Before he landed, blood splattered everywhere. Lord Ling Xiao. Seeing this scene, countless people's eyes were instantly filled with tears. The fear of death disappeared inexplicably. Being able to die on the same day as a contemporary hero like Lord Ling Xiao was probably the most memorable thing in their sloppy lives. Even if their descendants were to brag to others in the future, they would have one more thing to brag about. My ancestor died on the same day as Lord Ling Xiao and was buried in the same place. The two elders of the sacred cult looked at each other with gloomy expressions. Those who are not of our race are bound to have different intentions. Especially the Sea clan. They'd occupied the Southern Territory's boundless sea for thousands of years, and they possessed a terrifying foundation. If not for the fact that this race was unable to leave the deep sea for long periods of time, the current master of the Shengzhou continent might not have been a human. If it's the Sea Emperor's decree, the Shengzhou will be in great trouble. If it's just the Sea clan, things may not be so bad, but the two elders of the sacred sect looked at each other. Holy Sun, why don't you return to Dao Comprehension Mountain first, and we will go to Cold Moon Immortal Palace to find out the truth. Hearing this, Meng Yuan shook her head lightly. Since it was an experience that the Divine Master had given her, how could she back down? Let's go to Cold Moon Immortal Mountain first. If I'm not wrong, the fourth Divine Envoy Soul Consciousness should have appeared there last. With that, Meng Yuan no longer hesitated and walked into the distance. Cough, cough. On the mountain path, Ling Zhao's figure slowly stood up. At this moment, several bones in his body were broken. His aura was weak, and the corners of his mouth were stained with blood. Only his eyes were clear and cold, with a hidden smile. The most important thing in acting was to be realistic. Especially this time, he wasn't sure if the Master God from the Saint would be the one who came. Therefore, he had to be more careful. However, no matter who the Saint sent today, no matter how they investigated, there would only be one answer. The primitive emperor had joined forces with the demons and the sea race to kill the divine envoy and destroy Cold Moon Immortal Palace. In the end, the demons and the sea race returned to southern territory, and the primitive emperor stayed here to clean up the mess. In this way, the attention of the saint should be focused on southern territory and the sea race. As for the 6 reclusive, great demon seniors, isn't it time for you to come out and stretch your muscles? Ha! Whether southern territory is chaotic or not, it's still up to you. Don't you know how to fish in troubled waters? Also, the disciple of the 6 demons must be a like-minded person, no, a comrade. Ling Xiao couldn't wait to meet him. He stood up. Lord Ling Xiao stood up. The entire immortal mountain began to boil. The people of Western Territory walked out of the broken cliff and looked at the figure in white who slowly stood up with a sad expression and thunderous applause. At this moment, heaven and earth seemed to be moved by the young man's tenacity, and a drizzle fell. Everyone stood in place with awe, looking at the young man who suddenly raised his hands and shouted, "Evil can never defeat justice. Justice! Justice!" Tens of thousands of cultivators roared to the sky, and spiritual light bloomed from their bodies. However, at this moment, the primitive emperor had a look of disdain on his face. With a wave of his hand, a palm print of death aura appeared in the air and suppressed toward Ling Xiao and the countless figures. At the same time, corpses began to appear around the immortal mountain. It was the million corpse soldiers commanded by the primitive emperor. Boom! On the death seal, ghostly patterns filled the air, revealing endless evil. The void instantly shattered, and the vast divine might stretch for hundreds of miles. At this moment, the primitive emperor had a thought in his mind. If he could take advantage of this opportunity to kill this young man, would he still have a chance to live? However, as soon as this thought appeared, he felt a great fear rising from the bottom of his heart. Even the primitive emperor had an illusion that as long as Ling Xiao willed it, there was no need for anyone else to do anything. Ling Xiao could kill him with just a thought. Evil can never defeat justice. Evil can never defeat justice. Facing the shocking seal of a 7th-grade divine emperor and the hundreds of thousands of corpse soldiers, the cultivators on Cold Moon Immortal Mountain had already lost all hope. The only belief that supported them was what Lord Ling Xiao said just now. Evil can never defeat justice. Everyone clenched their fists and roared to the sky. The spiritual light scattered all over the sky, illuminating their faces, making them look even paler and more determined. The ghost seal smashed down and instantly shattered the already broken immortal mountain. In the end, a miracle did not happen. Nearly half of the Western Borders cultivators and commoners were smashed into pieces by the seal. Only 100 zhang away from Ling Xiao, a pitch-black ancient pagoda stood tall in the sky, blocking a wisp of divine might and protecting thousands of cultivators. However, his body was trembling even more violently. The blood-red clothes on his body were dazzling, as if he was a lamp that had run out of oil. "Young master, Humph. This treasure is not bad. It can actually block the attack of a divine emperor. Break for this emperor. The primitive emperor snorted coldly, ghost fog lingering around him. Apparently, he was really angry. But at this moment, a burst of wind-breaking sound came from the distant sky. Then, all the Western Borders cultivators were pleasantly surprised to see streaks of divine rainbow streaking across the sky and arriving in front of Ling Xiao in the blink of an eye. Dragon Lord, Brother Xiao, Fu, cousin. Chapter 600. At the foot of the cold moon mountain, Qin Wushuang was dressed in an emperor robe, and her beautiful eyes were filled with sorrow, especially when the young man's face was pale. An indelible murderous intent flashed in her eyes. Behind her, Ning Tiance and Xiao Beifa were also shocked. Fighting against an emperor god as a divine general? What a terrifying battle record. Even in the entire Shenzhou, no one could do it since ancient times. Except for Ling Xiao. It's Empress Wushuang. Empress Wushuang is leading an army to save us. The remaining thousands of martial artists cried out in surprise and lost their voices. Too exciting. I'm just a minor character. Is there a need for me to be so nervous and full of twists and turns? Regardless, looking at the two figures standing side by side, not far away, everyone's eyes were filled with sincere reverence. Wushuang. Ling Xiao smiled gently and wiped away the tears from the corner of Qin Wushuang's eyes. You're here. Why didn't you say so earlier? You should have informed General Xiao earlier. Qin Wushuang bit her red lips tightly with tears in her eyes. Today, Xiao Beifa suddenly received a message from Ling Xiao saying that there were demons besieging the cold moon celestial mountain and asked him to gather the great Qin experts to lead an army to rescue them. Of course, this time was already calculated by Ling Xiao. In the eyes of Qin Wushuang and the others, he was not a demon. For some things, it was better for them not to know. After all, Ling Xiao did not plan to take Qin Wushuang and the others away. The West Border needed a loyal manager after all. I also didn't expect the primitive emperor to be so insidious and collude with the Sea clan. Ling Xiao sighed lightly and raised his head to look at the figure covered in ghost qi in the void. Big brother, General Xiao, can you stop the primitive emperor? Try your best. Ning Tiance's expression was calm, while Xiao Beifa's body was surrounded by blood qi and his eyes were filled with battle intent. Kill. Accompanied by everyone's angry roar, Xiao Beifa's body transformed into a bloodlight and rushed out. The pitch-black heavy halberd in his hand pierced through the clouds and fell toward the primitive emperor's head with destructive power. Humph! A mere fourth-grade divine emperor dares to be so fierce before me. To be honest, the primitive emperor was feeling extremely bitter right now. He was clearly a wise ruler. Why did I end up becoming an evil demon that cannot be tolerated by the world? What if you include me? Ning Tiance snorted as he held the azure dragon saber in his hand horizontally. There seemed to be thousands of soldiers following behind him. An unparalleled momentum instantly surged out. Tens of thousands of battle shadows formed a formation and turned into a series of killing attacks. You dare to stand in the way of this emperor? The primitive emperor's eyes were filled with disdain as he struck out with his palm. Instantly, the void that had just calmed down once again rippled with boundless spiritual might. Streaks of divine light fell like the Milky Way, and the sun and moon turned upside down. The joint attack of Ning Tiance and Xiao Beifa, the two Western Border War gods, might not be able to withstand a 7th-rank emperor's aura, but it had the unique dominance of a general. Tens of thousands of pounds of battle intent converged into one person. He was invincible and had the momentum to sweep through the universe. Great heavenly official, Commander Yin, kill. Qin Wushuang turned around and stood side by side with Ling Xiao. Naturally, there was a wave of Emperor's power circulating around his body. In that void, a few more figures walked out. All of them had reached the Emperor realm. They were the Great Qin heavenly official Hu Yin and the Imperial Guard commander Yan Zheng. Kill! Ling Xiao raised his head and looked at the void in the distance. Soul light flashed in his eyes. At this moment, he could feel that 3 extremely powerful auras were rushing towards this place rapidly. However, among the 3, 2 of them were 7th-rank God Emperors. The remaining one was only at the Divine Lord realm. He was not a Divine Master. Perhaps, with the level of Ling Xiao's Divine Soul, even if a Divine Master were to come in person, it would be difficult for Ling Xiao to detect him if he deliberately concealed his aura. However, from the memories of the 4th Divine Envoy, Ling Xiao had some intuitive understanding of the current Saint sect. Needless to say, they had a strong foundation. These past Divine Masters indeed came from the upper realm. Their cultivation was tyrannical and could crush a world. However, among the many memories, the only thing that interested Ling Xiao was that the past Divine Masters rarely directly intervened in the matters of the 4 borders. Most of the time, the Divine Envoys were in charge of the power. Only this one held all the power in one hand. Moreover, what surprised Ling Xiao even more was that 300 years ago, the Saint sect had undergone a shocking change. The previous Divine Master was severely injured by the reincarnation of the Sky Demon, and his whereabouts were unknown. The current Divine Master descended from the sky and swept across the 4 borders with his unparalleled cultivation to find the whereabouts of the demon. In the end, he killed the demon himself and became a Divine Master. All of this seemed to be logical. However, this period of time was really thought-provoking. 300 years ago, the Saint sect began to search for experts of the principal laws. The Divine Master led them to the battlefield to seek enlightenment and ascend to the upper realm. However, these experts of the principal laws who were led by the Saint sect all disappeared without exception. Even the Divine Envoys did not know whether they were alive or dead. According to Partridge Gully's idea, no one could step out of the shackles of this world. The past Divine Masters never showed their real faces. They were all honorable realm cultivators from the upper realm. Even the saint of the Saint sect was known by people, but not his appearance. He was extremely mysterious. Therefore, no one doubted the identity of the Divine Master from the beginning to the end. In other words, no one dared to doubt it. Interesting. Vaguely, Ling Xiao felt that this routine was somewhat familiar. The more mysterious and powerful a living being was, the less likely it would arouse suspicion even if they were replaced. Now, this Divine Master might be hiding some shocking secrets. Boom! Above the void, there was suddenly a vast and mighty divine aura. In the hands of the primitive emperor, 2 ghost seals appeared at the same time and suppressed Ning Tiance and Xiao Beifa. Smoke and dust rose from the heaven and earth. Even with the strength of the 2 war gods, they were completely at a disadvantage when facing the primitive emperor who was a 7th-grade god emperor. Humph! You overestimate yourself. However, just as the primitive emperor stepped out and was about to rush towards the 2 loud and clear buzzing sounds suddenly came from the distant void. Buzz! Dazzling golden radiance bloomed from the firmament, and the Tao patterns were thousands of miles long. It was as if 2 new suns were whistling over. Ling Xiao's eyes narrowed slightly, and a smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. Finally, it's here. 2 figures in golden robes broke through the void and appeared above the primitive emperor's head. Behind the 2, golden light gushed out and transformed into a bridge. Faintly, there were red-crowned cranes and spiritual sparrows flying around the bridge. It was a scene of immortals. A slender figure stepped over like an immortal, walked across the golden bridge, and gradually revealed his appearance. However, at this moment, his face was covered with immortal clouds, and no one could see his appearance clearly. Furthermore, even with the level of Ling Xiao's divine soul, he could not see through it completely. He could only vaguely feel that it was a young man. Evil demon, you're courting death. The golden-robed young man's voice was clear, like the cry of a phoenix from the 9th heaven, containing an unquestionable majesty. His gaze moved from Xiao Beifa Qin Wushuang, and the others, and finally fell on Ling Xiao. Feeling the latter's injuries, the young man's eyes narrowed slightly, and he nodded slightly. However, for some reason, the saint of the sacred sect felt an inexplicable chill from the bottom of his heart. It was as if under this young man's gentle appearance, there was another appearance hidden. This was a villain, Meng Yuan's instincts told her. I'm the saint of the sacred sect, and I'm here to slay evil. Evil demon, quickly surrender. Finally, a trace of coldness flashed in Meng Yuan's eyes. She barely suppressed the distracting thoughts in her heart and looked at the primitive emperor coldly. Saint of the sacred sect. At this moment, the immortal mountain was silent, and tens of thousands of people were worshipping. Only Ling Xiao seemed to have a subtle smile on the corner of his mouth. Chapter 601. Rumor had it that the saint had a holy son with a mysterious origin. It was said that when he entered the saint, he was accepted as a disciple by the divine master and taught him alone. However, in the entire Xingzhou, all the sects and forces had only heard of this holy son's talent, but had never seen him in person. Who would have thought that he would come out today? Of course, no matter how mysterious the girl's face was, it couldn't escape the system's recognition. 9 heavens arcane body, heart of 7 orifices, light, thunder, and illusion 3 of them, 5,000 providence points. Ling Xiao had a playful look in his eyes, but he sighed in his heart. As expected of the saint. Oh no, it should be the saintess. Meng Yuan's cultivation had already entered the 4th stage of the divine overlord realm. Moreover, what surprised Ling Xiao was that Saintess Meng Yuan had a very faint sealing power on her body. Legend had it that the 9 heavens arcane body was a divine body that only appeared once in 1,000 years. It could deduce cultivation techniques and find flaws. In other words, the longer one fought with it, the lower the chance of winning. She was invincible under the same stage. And the heart of 7 orifices was a state of mind of enlightenment. Others who cultivated for 100 years were no match for her in 10 years. Someone from the saint? So what if you're a holy son? Even Partridgely was killed by me. Anyone who comes today will die. Above the void, the Yuan emperor sneered, and the ghostly mist outside his body transformed into a ghostly shadow that stood tall between heaven and earth. At this moment, his expression was dignified and his tone was tough, but he was already panicking in his heart. The holy son of the saint had a much higher status than the divine envoy. Moreover, although this holy son had never been born, his name had already spread far and wide. He was the only successor of the divine master. Just this identity alone was enough to make all the forces in the Shengzhou wary. This was because there was an exalted realm cultivator standing behind him. But what can I do? I want to kneel down and cry to you about the injustice in my heart. But someone planted a seal in my soul's sea. Arrogant, ignorant. Meng Yuan scolded softly, and golden light shone from her body. She stood there like a blazing sun that wanted to purify all evil in the world. Elders, follow me. Let's kill this demon. With that, Meng Yuan turned into a rainbow light and flew towards Yuan Emperor. Behind him, the 2 elders of the sacred cult didn't dare to hesitate. Spiritual light shone brightly around their bodies as they materialized into divine shadows, appearing above the Yuan Emperor's head out of thin air. Then, each of them held a Tao artifact in their hands. A bell and a sword slashed towards the primitive emperor. The golden bell imprisoned heaven and earth, and in the blink of an eye, it grew to a size of 1,000 feet. Above the sword, there was also an unparalleled sharpness that sliced the space neatly as it slashed towards the primitive emperor. Faced with the joint attack of 2 7th-grade divine emperors, the primitive emperor was unwilling to accept the outcome. His emperor Qi filled the sky with boundless ghost intent. Behind him, the ghost shadow's eyes shot out a scarlet light. Just one thread was enough to crush Bailey Qingtian. Boom! The 3 attacks collided with a loud bang, and the world instantly turned dark. However, The primitive emperor had just ascended to the 7th grade after all. His cultivation base and means were definitely unable to compete with the elders of the sacred sect. With just a single strike, he spat out a mouthful of blood and was sent flying. Evil demon, you deserve to die. In Meng Yuan's hand, a 7-foot-long green sword that seemed to be made of gold slashed down from the sky. The vast golden sun dispersed the ghostly fog, carrying the supreme divinity, blocking the primitive emperor's escape route. If you want to kill me, you'll have to pay a price. At this moment, in everyone's eyes, the primitive emperor was already at the end of his road. However, there was still no panic in his eyes. He turned around and shattered the golden radiance with a seal. His figure once again stood above the sky. 1,000 ghosts returned to the soul, undead sacrifice. Accompanied by a furious roar, hundreds of thousands of undead soldiers below the immortal mountain let out a sharp shriek. The shriek shook the 9 heavens as if it was the underworld. Wisps of ghostly chi rose from the ground and gathered around the primitive emperor. His aura instantly rose and vaguely reached the peak of the 7th grade divine emperor. What a sinister means. The 2 elders of the sacred sect looked at each other, with a trace of horror in their eyes. No wonder the 4th divine envoy, an 8th grade divine emperor, died in the hands of this evil demon. At this moment, his cultivation base was extremely close to the 8th grade. If he had the help of the Sea Clan experts, Partridge Gully would definitely be defeated. 4th elder, do it! The 2 elders of the sacred sect looked solemn. The spiritual radiance around them no longer held back and bloomed in the sky. The sound of the great Tao reverberated, and a series of colorful Tao patterns spread out in midair. On the golden bell, there seemed to be phantoms of dragons and elephants floating and coiling around the bell, revealing an aura that could suppress 10,000 realms. In the other divine envoy's hand, the Tao sword divine runes circulated, and the sword's humming resounded through 10,000 miles. Then, the 2 converged their spiritual power and activated their spiritual treasures to suppress the ghost shadow. The sword light was 10,000 miles long, piercing through the heavy fog and lighting up the void. 10,000 sword intents spread out in all directions, piercing through the sky with unparalleled killing intent. The golden bell turned into a stream of light and evolved into an ancient formation, trapping the primitive emperor's figure in place. Die! The primitive emperor roared angrily, and thousands of ghost shadows appeared in 100 miles around him. It was extremely eerie. A ghost seal, which seemed to be condensed by 10,000 ghosts, appeared above his head. Blood-colored soul light surged from the primitive emperor's forehead. At this moment, he chose to burn his divine soul. A bloody and strange aura swept out in all directions. On the ghost seal, there were tens of thousands of blood patterns climbing and entangling like a ghost hand, sending chills down one's spine. 3 great 7th grade god emperors attacked at the same time, and heaven and earth couldn't bear their power. At this moment, the entire western border was covered with dark clouds and bone-chilling winds. Boom! The ghost seal hung upside down in all directions. The sea of ghost chi turned into wind, blowing from the underworld. It was bone-chilling. Finally, the golden bell fell, and the sword intense slashed down, colliding with the square seal. Boom! At this moment, even Ling Zhao's figure unconsciously retreated 100 miles, looking at the terrifying spiritual power that soared into the sky in surprise. Die! All of you die! In the blur, everyone could hear the primitive emperor's desperate roar. Then, an even more terrifying spiritual power rushed out from the dazzling divine light. Boom, boom! The whole world was shattered like ice crystals, and it was extremely broken. However, Ling Zhao's face had an inexplicable smile. Qin Wushuang, Ning Tiance, and the others rushed over from afar and stood next to Ling Xiao. At this moment, everyone had a solemn look in their eyes. The counterattack of a 7th grade god emperor before his death must be terrifying. Even if the two elders of the sacred sect could resist it, they would be seriously injured. Time passed slowly, and heaven and earth were dead silent. However, the hundreds of thousands of corpse soldiers and the god emperors of the Yuan dynasty suddenly had a flash of panic in their eyes. Then, their bodies began to disintegrate. The primitive emperor was dead. These so-called soul slaves naturally didn't have the slightest chance of survival. When light shone down from the sky, everyone was stunned to see the two divine envoys of the sacred sect standing in the air, but the primitive emperor was nowhere to be seen. However, at this moment, the aura of the two was extremely weak, and their faces were pale. There seemed to be blood stains at the corner of their mouths. Especially the old man with the sword. One of his arms and shoulder was shattered, and he looked miserable. Obviously, even if the two of them joined forces, they were seriously injured by the primitive emperor's final attack. Chapter 602. Cough, cough. In the void, Meng Yuan's eyes were cold, and the golden light around her body was somewhat dim. Although she did not participate in the battle just now, just the aftershock of the battle had caused her to be greatly affected. However, now that the demon had been killed, she did not feel too relaxed. On the contrary, she still felt that it was too easy to kill the demon. Although the two elders were also seriously injured, since the demon could kill the divine envoy and join forces with the Sea Clan to destroy the Cold Moon Celestial Palace. How could he not know that the Holy Sect would send experts? Moreover, where did the legendary expert of the Sea Clan go? Meng Yuan's figure descended from the sky and landed in front of Ling Xiao and the others. "What's your name?" At this moment, there was a touch of absolute coldness in her eyes. It was as if everything in this world was just her duty to protect, not living creatures. Even her tone was filled with indifference from the bottom of her heart. Killing the demon was her duty, not her emotions. Ling Xiao. Ling Xiao smiled indifferently, and his eyes were still calm. However, beside him, Qin Wushuang and the others were somewhat restrained. It could not be helped. The Holy Sect had ruled the Shenzhou for thousands of years and could be said to be supreme. Whether it was the emperor of the dynasty or the leader of an ancient sect, it was inevitable that they would feel fear when they saw this sect. "Tell me in detail what happened today." Meng Yuan's voice was not mixed with a trace of emotion. It was as if she was born emotionless and without desire. "Oh, a few days ago, I walked out of the Immortals and learned that a great demon had appeared in the western border. This great demon joined forces with the Sea Clan and tried to dominate the western border and overthrow the Holy Sect's rule. I discussed with the Cold Moon Celestial Palace Master to protect the cultivators of the western border. Get to the point." Meng Yuan frowned and looked coldly at Ling Xiao. "Didn't you ask me to tell you in detail?" A woman's heart was indeed fickle. Xia Feng and Yu Xiao joined forces to infiltrate the Immortals and release the great demon. Then, today, the primitive emperor led the demons to attack the Cold Moon, Celestial Mountain, and killed Palace Master Rin. The expert of the Sea Clan and one of the great demons left first, leaving the primitive emperor here to clean up the battlefield. Ling Xiao said calmly, but Meng Yuan fell silent. After a long while, she asked coldly, "Have you seen the fourth divine envoy of the Holy Church, Sir Oracle?" It is said that when the divine envoy went to the Yuan dynasty, there was no news of him at all. Ling Xiao shook his head with a puzzled expression. There were some things that he didn't need to point out. Otherwise, it would seem deliberate. Based on the behavior of these people from the Holy Church, he could imagine the complete plot in his head. He, on the other hand, was just an innocent genius from the western border who had been dragged into this disaster. Of course, Ling Xiao had already considered that Partridge Li's death would cause the soul tablet to shatter. However, how could he know such a secret? The evil methods of the God Emperor were not something that a divine general like him could understand. Holy Sun, the divine order. At this moment, an elder of the sacred cult passed over a golden token. I found it on the primitive emperor. Everything seemed to be flawless. No matter how Partridge Li died, it was probably related to the primitive emperor, and Ling Xiao and the rest were the primitive emperor's enemies. They were demon-slaying heroes. This was something that the thousands of disciples present could testify. Elder Sun, Meng Yuan nodded indifferently and called out softly. Elder Sun immediately understood and walked to the front of the mountain path. Suddenly, a golden light rose around him. Ling Xiao raised his eyebrows slightly and had a guess in his heart. He was afraid that this elder of the Holy Church was proficient in some kind of method that could detect the changes in the aura here. Golden light sprinkled down and evolved into thousands of arrays. Gradually, some blurry shadows appeared. It was the unforeseen event that happened here, just now. After a long while, Elder Sun walked back to Meng Yuan's side and nodded gently. Holy Sun, what this young man said is true. Indeed, a great demon and the Sea Clan had descended and killed Ren Yueying. Sent a message to the first divine envoy to investigate the Sea Clan from the western border to the southern border. Pay attention to the demon's tracks. Meng Yuan nodded. She didn't dare to delay this matter, but her eyes were fixed on Ling Xiao from beginning to end. Since the demon has been eliminated, let's disperse. Yes. On Mount Han, the cultivators of the western border bowed and turned to leave. Before leaving, everyone walked in front of Ling Xiao and bowed respectfully. Lord Ling Xiao, we will take our leave. See you again. Ling Xiao's expression was gentle as he returned their greetings. After this matter, he believed that his good name would soon spread throughout the western border. However, just as Ling Xiao and the others were about to leave, Meng Yuan's eyes suddenly flashed with killing intent. Lord Ling Xiao, please wait. Ling Xiao's eyes narrowed slightly, but there was a gentle smile on his face. I wonder if Holy Sun has any instructions. Just now, I saw that young master has a pagoda that can imprison a great demon. I wonder if you can let me take a look? Oh, Holy Sun's request is a little too much. Ling Xiao shook his head, but there was a smile on his face. Why? Is Holy Sun planning to snatch my treasure? Not really. I'm just curious about what kind of treasure can help you, a divine general, to imprison 7 divine emperors. After Meng Yuan finished her words, the 2 elders of the sacred sect's faces suddenly turned serious. The 7 orifices' exquisite heart of Tao was rare in the world. Not only could she comprehend the great Tao, but it was obvious that Meng Yuan's mind was also extremely sharp. Of course, the most important point was that she was an outsider and had never entered the game. Therefore, she had to maintain a vigilance against anyone. This was the so-called the onlooker sees the game more clearly than the player involved. Although Ling Xiao's plan was exquisite for Ren Yueying and the others, it was because they believed that Ling Xiao's plan was simple. Originally, they believed that Ling Xiao was a disciple of the divine envoy and had witnessed many of his righteous deeds. But now, there were many doubts in Meng Yuan's eyes about the originally flawless plan. There wasn't anything wrong with the way things were going. Everything seemed to be a meticulously planned scam by the primitive emperor and the Sea Clan. But from the beginning to the end, this young man seemed to be in the game, pushing the development of the situation, and he was lucky enough to survive. The world was ignorant and believed that seeing was believing. But sometimes, what one saw could also be an illusion. Meng Yuan had just entered the world, and she didn't have any feelings for anyone. She firmly believed in slaying demons and protecting the world. My treasure is naturally very powerful. It's easy to imprison divine emperors. Ling Xiao's lips curled into a smile, and immediately there was a layer of horrifying ripples above his head. Before the 2 divine envoys and Meng Yuan could react, the 3 of them, together with Ling Xiao, had already disappeared. With Ling Xiao's current 7th grade divine emperor divine soul, ordinary divine emperors wouldn't be able to resist the realm devouring if he acted rashly. Therefore, when Meng Yuan and the others reacted, they had already been sucked in. Looking at the picturesque scenery before them, the 3 of them were astonished. This was especially true for Meng Yuan, whose beautiful eyes revealed an additional trace of shock. Am I really overthinking? She was the saint of the saint and had many tricks up her sleeves. But she understood that there was always someone better than you. Therefore, she wasn't interested in Ling Zhao's secret. She just felt that everything that had happened was too coincidental. But now, it seemed that she had underestimated the young man in front of her. In this way, there was nothing unreasonable about it. Even with the two elders' strength, they couldn't resist the power of the treasure if they were caught off guard, let alone the primitive emperor and the few low-grade divine emperors. Seems like Meng Yuan has misunderstood you. Meng Yuan said softly, but she saw a gentle smile on the young man's face. Chapter 603. Say, Meng Yuan, how did you misunderstand me? Do you think that I'm in cahoots with the demons? Ling Xiao stood with his hands clasped behind his back, looking carefree. The star robe shone with a dazzling brilliance. Meng Yuan shook her head slightly, and an apologetic look flashed in her eyes. She had seen the respect the people of Shijiang had for Ling Xiao, and there was no lack of divine kings among them. Although most people in the world were foolish, there was no fool among those who could cultivate to the divine king level. Maybe I'm thinking too much. Meng Yuan sighed and bowed slightly to Ling Xiao. What you did today is righteous, and Meng Yuan admires your methods. However, as a righteous person, it's our duty to kill demons. Those who are not of our race must have different intentions. Killing them is a form of protection. Moreover, the demons are treacherous now, so Meng Yuan has to be careful. Treacherous demons. That's right. Ling Xiao nodded. Saint, did the Divine Master come to Shijiang? Is there something you need, young master? Meng Yuan looked at Ling Xiao calmly. Even though he had used his methods to get rid of suspicion, Meng Yuan still felt uneasy. It was an intuition. Whenever she saw Ling Xiao's handsome face, she would feel terrified. But how could it be? With Meng Yuan's strength, she was definitely the strongest among her peers in Shijiang, not to mention Shijiang. But now, she actually felt fear from a young man. Meng Yuan inexplicably felt that there was something wrong with this young man. Now, the saint is in charge of everything in the saint sect. Young master, you can tell the saint anything. The two saint elders smiled gently. They did not have much prejudice against Ling Xiao. The saint sect's third elder, Xuananji, was good at the saint sect's secret technique, the Tao of tracing. Just now, he had seen Ling Xiao vomiting blood and falling to the ground again and again in order to kill the demons. But in the end, this young man still stood in front of the common people and stopped the demons. Although the saint was meticulous and thoughtful, it was obvious that this young man should be a person with great luck since he could survive the demons. Such a person should join the saint's sect and be its backbone. Oh, the Holy Sun will take charge of the holy sect? Ling Xiao raised his eyebrows and looked at Meng Yuan in surprise. The fact that a mere fourth-grade divine overlord could take charge of the saint's sect spoke volumes. With Ling Xiao's intelligence, he quickly thought of two possibilities. Firstly, Meng Yuan had a great background. She might even have come from the upper world. Otherwise, the Divine Lord would not have protected her like this. Secondly, the Divine Master had an important matter to attend to. Thinking back to what he had done before, perhaps in the entire saint sect, only this disciple who had been cultivating with him since young could be considered a completely trustworthy person. However, what made Ling Xiao a little suspicious was that this saint was obviously a model of righteousness, and his cultivation was only for the sake of slaying demons. Such a temperament was in line with the teachings of the saint. However, if she were to find out about the Divine Master's actions, would her Tao heart directly crumble? No matter what kind of secret the Divine Master of the sacred sect was hiding, the Nine Nether Down Phoenix clan's misfortune was real. Perhaps he had never thought that someone from that clan would be lucky enough to survive. That's right. Meng Yuan looked coldly at the elder who spoke, as if blaming him for speaking too much. Where did the Divine Master go? Ling Xiao asked casually, but Meng Yuan's eyes flashed with obvious impatience. Is there anything else, sir? If not, please open the spiritual treasure. We have important matters to attend to in the southern border. That's all. I just want to correct the saying on one thing. Ling Zhao's lips curled into a playful smile. I'm not an accomplice of the demons. Haha, Lord Ling Xiao, you must be joking. Our saint is just being overly cautious. The two elders of the sacred sect laughed awkwardly and tried to explain for Meng Yuan. Because I am the one you are looking for, the true demon, the great demon, the sky demon. Ling Xiao smiled faintly, and a domineering aura rose around him. Hearing that, the two elders' faces stiffened, and there was a hint of gloominess between their brows. Sir, this is not a joke. Do I look like I am joking with you? Ling Xiao shook his head, and his eyes suddenly turned pitch black. At the same time, there seemed to be a demonic aura in the realm. The originally clear sky darkened instantly. There was a demonic sun hanging in the sky, revealing the vastness of the world. All the light in the world was annihilated, and only that sun was eternal. The two divine envoys of the sacred sect opened their mouths wide, and they felt a chill rising from the bottom of their feet to the top of their heads. How is this possible? The sky demon. This aura is a sky demon. A sky demon has appeared in the Xingzhou. Only Meng Yuan's expression turned serious at first, but soon turned calm. That's right. That's why she was so afraid. She wasn't afraid of this young man's cultivation, but his identity. His identity couldn't be changed. With that thought, divine light scattered around Meng Yuan, transforming into a majestic immortal palace. An array of clear light bloomed in the demonic light. There seemed to be thousands of miles of immortal light, and ancient trees formed a forest filled with endless vitality. At that moment, there was a slight fluctuation in her realm. The exquisite heart of 7 orifices was so terrifying. When one's mind was connected and comprehended, the breakthrough was naturally achieved. Ling Xiao raised his eyebrows and nodded slightly. She was indeed the daughter of destiny with 5,000 providences. Her temperament was indeed terrifying. The sky demon was a demonic barrier to the people of the Xingzhou. But Meng Yuan was able to find an opportunity to break through in her fear. 3 divine envoys come to the western border quickly. The sky demon has appeared. A divine token in Meng Yuan's hand shone with golden light. But when the golden light floated in the air, it was inexplicably blocked by an invisible divine power. Meng Yuan's eyes narrowed, and for the first time, she looked serious. Since this demon had set up such an exquisite chess game, he must have been prepared to deal with the sacred sect. In this strange space, one could advance or retreat. If the one who came was a divine master, even if his scheme was exposed, he could escape into this world and temporarily avoid danger. Since he had brought the 3 of them into this world, he must have enough confidence to kill all of them. It's useless. This is my realm. Other than me, no one can send out their divine sense or soul consciousness. Ling Xiao smiled faintly and looked at the 2 divine envoys of the sacred sect. If the 2 of them were at their peak, it would take some effort to kill them. But now, the primitive emperor was actually an important chess piece in Ling Xiao's game. He took the blame for killing and severely injuring the divine envoys of the sacred sect. Using his 7th grade divine emperor as a chess piece, wouldn't it be a pity if he couldn't make full use of it? Knowing the heavens and the earth, you are all ants. Stepping on the moon with the galaxy, I am not afraid of 10,000 enemies. So, the 4th divine envoy and the cold moon palace master died in your hands? Even the primitive emperor was just a chess piece that cooperated with you? Meng Yuan sighed softly. By now, she had more or less figured out the whole story. But there was one thing she was puzzled about. How did the sky demon get involved with the Sea clan? Even the divine master was full of praise for Elder Sun's tracing method. Since he had sensed the aura of the Sea clan, it couldn't be wrong. Chapter 604. That's right. As expected of the heart of 7 orifices. Ling Xiao didn't deny it. In any case, he didn't intend to let the 3 of them go today. No matter why the divine master handed the power of the saint to Meng Yuan, he probably wouldn't notice that the 3 of them were missing. As long as their soul consciousness wasn't broken, the saint would most likely think that the three of them were investigating the murder of the divine envoys. This way, Ling Xiao would have time to get more useful information from the saintess. What? The people of the saint were upright, loyal, and unyielding. They would never bow down to demons. The fourth divine envoy was the best example. TSK. The fourth divine envoy wasn't a woman. There was nothing more effective than the simplest and most direct way to deal with someone like Meng Yuan. Take off her clothes, take her body, occupy her sect, and be her king. One word, TSK. Once her Tao heart was broken, she could be manipulated at will. Is the Sea tribe really rebelling? Meng Yuan raised her head and looked coldly at Ling Xiao. Hasn't the Sea tribe always wanted to rebel? Don't tell me you don't know. Ling Xiao didn't answer. Instead, he asked Meng Yuan a question. The latter frowned and didn't say anything. Everyone knew about the Sea tribe's intentions. When the saint ruled the Shenzhou, the Sea tribe was unwilling to submit and was forced to retreat to the depths of the South Sea. However, the Sea tribe was similar to the demon race. They were made up of many different races. But 500 years ago, an ocean emperor suddenly appeared in the Sea tribe. He conquered the Sea tribe and became the overlord of the southern border. If they didn't want to rebel, why would the ocean emperor waste so much effort and hundreds of years to unify the Sea tribe? All right, Saint, we've chatted for so long. It's time to send you on your way. Ling Xiao smiled faintly and looked up at the sky. Suddenly, two demonic figures gradually appeared in the sky above. When he brought Meng Yuan into the realm, he had already sent a message to Xiong Huan to ask him and Double Shadow to return. Otherwise, do you think I don't know the famous saying that villains die because they talk too much? TSK. Ling Xiao, although you are a sky demon, if you want to kill me, you will have to pay the price. Meng Yuan said calmly. The spiritual light around her gradually became brighter. In just a few breaths, the mystical palace above his head had already grown to a size of 1,000 feet. Among them, divine trees towered into the sky. Lightning bolts struck out in all directions, and a radiant sacred sun blossomed with an overflowing radiance. There was a faint, illusory intent within it that confused one's heart, and it gave one the misconception that one was already within it even before the divine watchtower arrived. Looks like the chosen one still hasn't given up. Ling Zhao's expression was gentle, but there was a hint of disdain between his brows. Above the void, ripples began to spread out. Immediately after, Meng Yuan and the other two saw several god emperors standing in the void, looking at them with mocking expressions. How is that possible? This demon actually has such power? The expressions of the two elders of the sacred sect changed drastically as a chill spread from the bottom of their hearts. Originally, they wanted to rely on their 7th grade realm to fight to the death. But from the looks of it, it was hard to say whether he would fight or not. After all, he was old, his spiritual power was exhausted, and his body was weak. But fighting to the death was much easier. I really didn't expect you to have such wings under the nose of the sacred sect. Meng Yuan sighed softly. At this moment, there was no trace of despair in her eyes, let alone fear. She was never worried about dying at the hands of the demon, but about the people of the world. The 4th divine envoy in Cold Moon Divine Palace had already been destroyed at the hands of the Sky Demon. Next, he would probably repeat his old plan and kill the 4 divine envoys one by one while they were all at the same border. Although the Divine Master's cultivation was supreme, seeing how the people of the western border respected him, the 4 borders would probably soon be under his control. The human forces were still manageable, as Sect Master Taishian was already the peak of the human race. But this person's background was mysterious, and he was dedicated to the Tao. He was not even moved by the sacred sect's recruitment, so he probably would not side with anyone. But the demon race and the Sea clan were already at odds with the human race. With this young man's temperament, he could probably turn them over, and there were some extremely terrifying existences among those two races. Shangzhou was shackled by heaven and earth, and could only have one venerable. But if the people rebelled, even the Divine Master would not be able to reverse the situation, right? Was this world really going to fall into the hands of the demons? Inexplicably, Meng Yuan's eyes flashed with vicissitudes. She had been cultivating with the Divine Master since she was young. Although she was still young, her talent was indeed terrifying. The Divine Master had even collected the world's ultimate techniques and historical records for her to comprehend. In the vast changes of history, Meng Yuan's horizons had been broadened. In fact, he was not the least bit inferior to the most powerful experts of the Shenzhou continent. She cared about the people of the world, but she had no desires. This was originally an extremely contradictory personality, but it was perfectly integrated in her. Cultivation was to achieve immortality and protect the people. In her eyes, the people of the world were all equal. Only demons could not be tolerated. Kill them, and her Tao would be complete. If there were no more demons in the world one day, so what if she lost her cultivation? I'll give you two options. If you submit to me, I'll let you live. Otherwise, I'll make you wish you were dead. Ling Xiao smiled faintly, but Meng Yuan did not speak. She unsheathed the ancient sword in her hand, which emitted a dazzling golden light. Clang! In an instant, a dazzling divine light pierced through the air and cleared the demonic clouds. Meng Yuan's figure floated up like a fairy and stood in the center of the divine light. She was peerless and eternal. At this moment, she was the most dazzling divine light in the world, especially the divine watchtower above her head. It was even more solid and majestic, as if it was an independent world. It was filled with indescribable majesty. Are you trying to act cool with me? Ling Zhao's lips curled into a playful smile. He suddenly raised his hand and gently pressed it down. Buzz! A terrifying boom suddenly resounded through the sky. There seemed to be a demonic palm above Meng Yuan's head that had pierced through the ages. It turned into a black curtain and fell from the sky. The space instantly shattered. A demonic figure stood in the sky and looked down on the world. Meng Yuan's imposing and ancient aura suddenly froze. Then, her eyes widened as she saw the world overturn. The sun and moon fell from the sky. Heaven and earth were reversed, and yin and yang were no longer there. As for her figure, it was actually being forcefully suppressed by a divine power that seemed to make everything in the world vanish. Boom! The entire realm was filled with smoke and dust. The saintess of the sacred sect, who was known as the #1 peerless genius in the Central Territory, the personal disciple of the sacred sect's divine master, and the genius of the sacred sect, who stood above her peers in the Shenzhou continent, couldn't even withstand a single palm from that demon. Hiss! The two elders of the sacred sect trembled. Their eyes widened as they felt an indescribable chill in their hearts. Could it be that this demon wasn't reborn, but was actually still alive? Capture him alive. Ling Xiao raised his head and looked at the two elders of the sacred sect. Their auras were weak and their hearts were trembling. His smile grew wider. In the next instant, Xiong Huan, Xing Shun, Huaheng, and the others lifted their feet and rushed toward the two elders. Xing Shun and Huaheng had become rank 5 martial emperors with the nourishment of countless medicinal pills. Xiong Huan's battle prowess was needless to say. It was naturally easy for him to deal with a heavily injured rank 7 martial emperor. Boom! Boom! Boundless spiritual might appeared in the sky. It was like a raging sea, intimidating the world. However, Ling Zhao's figure suddenly disappeared from where he stood. Chapter 605. Where the smoke and dust dispersed, countless cracks appeared on the ground. Meng Yuan fell to the ground. Her golden robe had long been torn apart, revealing her snow-white skin. Blood dripped from the corner of her mouth, and several of her bones were broken. However, she didn't seem to care at all. Her eyes were empty and lifeless. She lost. She wasn't surprised. Today, she was trapped in the spiritual treasure and was outnumbered. She couldn't escape defeat. She just didn't expect that she would be defeated by Ling Zhao's palm. Even if he was the sky demon, Meng Yuan didn't feel the slightest bit of fear, because her Jiutianxian body was a divine body that only appeared once in 1,000 years. She only needed to look at any cultivation technique to understand it, find the flaws, and finally kill the enemy. However, she didn't even see how the young man attacked before she was defeated. All of a sudden, Meng Yuan felt that her 20 years of cultivation were meaningless. What was invincible? What was invincible? It turned out that her vision was too narrow after all. Beep. The destined girl's Dao heart is covered in dust. Congratulations to the host for plundering 500 luck points and 5,000 villain points. It's starting already? Ling Zhao's lips curled into a playful smile. Indeed, the stronger one's Dao heart was, the easier it would be to shatter it. The reason why he suppressed this woman so quickly was to let her know what was invincible and what was divine. The Jiutianxian body was indeed mysterious. In the entire Xingzhou, there were only a handful of people who could break through to the Divine Lord realm at the age of 20. However, no matter what kind of divine body it was not worth mentioning in Ling Zhao's eyes. Moreover, Meng Yuan didn't take Ling Zhao seriously from the beginning. Sacred child Meng Yuan. Oh, no. Sacred daughter Meng Yuan, you still have a chance to choose your own fate. I have always been merciful, so I will give you another chance. Ling Zhao smiled faintly. He lowered his head and looked at the celestial beauty whose hair was draped over her shoulders. A sinister glint flashed in his eyes. This was a face that was as clean as the water in the Jade Lake. Untainted, ethereal, and pure. Her pair of starry eyes were cold and dark, but they also contained a hint of stubbornness. Looking at her, Ling Zhao felt as if he was looking at a lotus at the peak of a snowy mountain. Holy and proud, overflowing with immortal energy. Humph! Meng Yuan's beautiful face froze, and she suddenly closed her eyes as if she was fearless of death. Saintess, your peerless beauty is truly pitiful. Ling Zhao was not surprised by the attitude of the saintess. However, it would be easy to kill her, but she was perhaps the person who understood the divine master the most in the entire Xingzhou. If he could make them submit, the effect would be even greater. Moreover, Meng Yuan's heart was indeed filled with righteousness. However, the Lord God was not necessarily a righteous person. I, Ling Zhao, may be the sky demon, but I am willing to help the world see the other side. There is a beauty in the Holy Church. She is independent from the world. When she looks, she can topple a city. When she looks again, she can topple a country. When she looks again, she can topple a country. Ling Zhao looked up at the sky with a desolate expression. It's a pity to kill a beauty like this saintess. Shameless demon, you will eventually be despised by the world and destroyed by the Holy Church. Meng Yuan took a deep breath, and the hostility towards Ling Zhao in her heart grew stronger. This damned demon, how dare he trick me like this? Do you think you can erase my will just by saying a few nice words? I, Meng Yuan, have always been filled with righteousness. I am the natural enemy of demons. You want me to submit to you? Wishful thinking. Saintess, look at the clear sky and bright moon. Why don't we do something romantic? Ling Zhao smiled eerily and walked towards Meng Yuan. Meng Yuan's beautiful face froze, and she looked at Ling Zhao in horror, especially the evil smile on the young man's face, which made her feel a chill from the bottom of her heart. Buzz! Spiritual light suddenly surged in Meng Yuan's hand, but before she could imprint it on her head, her entire body seemed to be bound by an invisible giant hand, and she could no longer move. Saintess, what are you trying to do? Ling Zhao's eyes were cold, but his tone was surprisingly gentle. Suicide? Warning me? You're just a fourth-grade divine overlord, and you're in Ling Zhao's territory. Even if you want to die, you have to get my permission first. Buzz! A strange demonic aura turned into chains and wrapped around Meng Yuan's body. In an instant, Meng Yuan felt her body become heavy, and she could no longer feel her spiritual energy and divine soul. Her body was bound by the demonic aura, and she could not move at all. At this moment, Meng Yuan's eyes were finally filled with fear. What are you trying to do? Ling Zhao, kill me if you can. Otherwise, one day, I will tear you into pieces. In your eyes, those who are called demons are bad people. Over the years, many people have died in the hands of the saint, right? Ling Zhao's expression was calm, and he did not care about Meng Yuan's screams. Life is full of ups and downs. For those who are destined, as long as they live, there will always be a chance to turn things around and slap them in the face. But I have to give you time. The people that the saint killed were all demons. They deserve to die. Meng Yuan shouted coldly, and her eyes were filled with disbelief. On that picturesque face, there was a trace of extreme hatred towards the devil. You're wrong. The saint only needs to give these people the title of demons in advance. The path to immortality is to fight against the heavens and earth. What's wrong with killing people? Ling Xiao shook his head and looked down at the girl in front of him. All creatures have spirits. This world does not belong to the human race. Why do demons deserve to die? You are twisting words and forcing logic. Are you saying that it's right for demons to kill the common people? Meng Yuan was stunned for a moment. Then she said angrily, "Kill the common people? 1,000 years ago, the demon clan occupied the Shenzhou continent. Later, the divine master of the sacred sect descended and slaughtered millions of demon spirits with his own strength. Only then was the demon clan forced to retreat to the cold lands of the northern border for 1,000 years. If you put it that way, the divine master seems to be the greatest evil in the world." Though, suddenly, Meng Yuan's expression froze. Although she knew that this demon was just messing with her Tao heart, she did not know how to refute him. Those who obey the saint will live, and those who defy the saint will die. Is this the light you yearn for? Holy child Meng Yuan, you're too ridiculous. Ling Xiao stood with his hands behind his back. His jade-like face was 30% indifferent and 70% weathered. Light and darkness are ancient existences. How can they be decided by a single word from the human race? No, it's not like that. Demons are cruel and temperamental. I slay demons to protect the common people. Holy child, do you know about the 9 Serenities Phoenix clan? Ling Xiao suddenly opened his mouth and interrupted Meng Yuan. Of course I do. Meng Yuan's eyes were filled with confusion. This holy child probably had doubts in her heart. The 9 Serenities Phoenix clan surrendered to the saint 300 years ago. But what happened to them in the end? The 9 Serenities Phoenix clan was led to the upper world by the Divine Master because of their righteousness. Everyone knows about this. Meng Yuan's eyes were filled with confusion. She clearly did not know why Ling Xiao asked this question. Everyone knows? What good everyone knows. But why did I hear that the Divine Master massacred the 9 Serenities Phoenix clan just for the nether fire that they were born with? A cold glint flashed across Ling Xiao's eyes. For some reason, the world turned cold. No, impossible. Chapter 606. The Divine Master lied and said that the entire Dark Phoenix clan had gone to the upper realm, but I have a servant who was lucky enough to escape a wisp of her soul from the disaster 300 years ago. Does the saintess want to see her? Ling Zhao's voice was filled with a demonic nature. It was like a huge bell ringing in Meng Yuan's ears. At this moment, the saintess felt her heart tremble. She seemed to see a sea of blood, a mountain of corpses, and many dark phoenixes that were killed. Demon, how dare you mess with my Tao heart? Meng Yuan clenched her teeth and forced herself to remain clear-headed. Fine. Since you don't believe me, I will slowly reveal the Holy Church's true face and let you see the truth. Ling Xiao sighed softly with a helpless expression. This saintess seemed to have been taught thoroughly by the Divine Master. What the demon said was all lies. What I saw was the demon's methods. Interesting. This directly eliminated the possibility of her defection from her heart. Shameless demon, no matter what you do, don't think of making me submit. Shameless demon. Ling Xiao raised his eyebrows and finally nodded. You're right. In order to prove your inner thoughts, I think, I need to prove the demon's shamelessness. Boom! Suddenly, a dazzling spiritual light appeared around Ling Xiao. Then, Meng Yuan was dumbfounded to see the starry robe on the young man's body disintegrate, revealing a well-proportioned and slender body. At this moment, Meng Yuan felt despair that she had never felt before. She suddenly regretted infuriating the demon in front of her again and again. She should have known that the demon's actions were unscrupulous and cruel. However, she still underestimated the demon's shamelessness. The most romantic thing I can think of is to do it 10 times a day until you realize that you can't go anywhere. Only then will you treat me as the treasure in your heart. Ling Xiao smiled. He grabbed Ming Yuan's neck and lifted her in front of him. No, don't. Ming Yuan's eyes were filled with tears and panic. She was not afraid of death. She was not even afraid of the demon's torture. However, she did not expect the demon to. The intense pain seemed to come from her soul. Ling Xiao's brutality caused Meng Yuan's body and mind to tremble. However, at this time, her spiritual energy was sealed and she couldn't move. She could only watch the person in front of her rise and fall. When the sky gradually darkened, all the fluctuations in the realm finally calmed down. Ling Xiao stood up, stretched, and took out the real divine writ from Meng Yuan's bosom. Then, he walked away without looking back. Saintess Meng Yuan, from today onwards, I will come here every day to discuss the demonic nature with you. Pucci. Beep. The destined woman's mind has collapsed. Congratulations to host for plundering 1,000 luck points and 10,000 villain points. From the beginning to the end, Ling Xiao had not probed Meng Yuan's soul. Since the Divine Master had placed a trap in the sea of soul of a divine emissary of the saint, there was no need to mention the Divine Master's personal disciple in front of him. However, in Partridge Gully's memory, even he did not know Meng Yuan's true appearance. He did not even know her name. In other words, since Meng Yuan was brought into the saint by the Divine Master, she had only seen the elders and divine emissaries on the day she was appointed as the saint. As a result, originally, Ling Xiao was counting on the secret guards that he had placed in advance to help him during the trip to Nanjiang. However, it seemed that it was not so troublesome now. The Sea clan gathered in Nanjiang. Although the human race was weak, there were still a few clans with a long history. With Ling Xiao's identity, it seemed that he was still lacking if he wanted to command them. However, with the saint here, who would not obey? As for the first divine emissary, the Sea clan was rampant and dared to join forces with the demons to kill the divine emissary and slaughter the common people. Now that I am in charge of the saint, I am sending you to your death. Do you have any objections? When the Divine Master finally reacted, the saint might no longer have 4 divine emissaries. There might only be 2 left. Oh no, since there was still 1 divine emissary in Dongjiang, it was not impossible to kill him while the Divine Master was not paying attention to the affairs of the saint. Ling Xiao lowered his head and looked at the divine token in his hand. The smile in his eyes deepened. He originally thought that the saint's powerhouse would definitely leave a soul tablet in Enlightenment Mountain. However, it seemed that he had worried too much. There were thousands of different soul senses in the divine token. It was obvious that the Divine Master had placed this in the soul sea of the saint's powerhouse. Whenever someone died, the divine token would sense it. As for the soul tablet, if the Divine Master really had a backup plan, now that Partridge Li had died, he would have rushed to Shijiang. After all, Meng Yuan was his only disciple. How could he let her take the risk when even Partridge Li could not deal with the demon? Thinking of this, Ling Xiao already had an idea. As a villain, he naturally had to be more cautious. It was not until Ling Xiao's figure disappeared that tears fell from Meng Yuan's eyes. At first, it was silent, but gradually, it became heart-wrenching and extremely mournful. At this moment, she could still feel the intense pain coming from her body. However, compared to this pain, the scar in her heart was even more despairing. Meng Yuan probably never dreamed that one day her body would be sullied by a demon. She had a relationship with the devil that she hated and loathed the most. She was a righteous person, and her heart was always pure and flawless. However, now, her Tao heart and her physical body were not clean. When she thought of what the demon had said before he left, Meng Yuan only felt her body turn cold. It was more painful than death. Master, Xiong Huan and the others descended from the sky and threw the two divine envoys of the saint to the ground. At this moment, the two of them had all their bones broken. Their faces were ashen, and they no longer had any of their former majesty. Demon, you will not have a good ending. The Divine Master will definitely sense our deaths. When that time comes, who said I was going to kill you? Ling Zhao's lips curled into a smile. He motioned for Xiong Huan to bring the two of them to the medicine hall. You won't kill us? Demon, don't think you can make us submit. Even if we die. Noisy. Ling Xiao frowned slightly. His eyes were overflowing with cold light. When they fell into the eyes of the two divine emperors, they instantly felt a chill in their hearts. They silently shut their mouths. They did not know why, but at this moment, they felt that if they fell into the demon's hands, they would suffer more pain than death. When Ling Zhao's figure descended from the sky, Shi Dandi, Han Zhan, and the others put down the medicine cauldrons in their hands and bowed deeply to him. Looking at the majestic palace in front of him and the golden plaque hanging above it, Ling Zhao's eyes flashed with surprise. Medicine King Hall. Not bad. You've learned how to entertain yourself? Come on. Tools. Master. Shi Dandi smiled gently. The blood energy on his body rippled as if he had been reborn. Old Dan, I've brought 2 medicine slaves to the Medicine King Hall. In the future, you won't have to work so hard to make elixirs. Ling Xiao smiled gently. Suddenly, a dazzling soul light flashed in his eyes. Then, everyone was dumbfounded when they saw 2 strange soul pillars standing in front of the palace. There were demonic runes on them, and their evil power was vast. It was frightening. This is... Shi Dandi felt that the scene in front of him was somewhat familiar. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.